There are going to be some suggested changes, and we'll ask the committee to consider them, and that way we'll have a good solid idea as to what our document should look like and in what order at the next meeting. So I thank you for your indulgence. I thank you for being here. And with that, there is another. Thank you, Mel. There is. We've opened another room, the school committee room on the 5th floor. So if people who are here would like to sit down, I've been down there. There are actually some seats there. We thought that would be good. And it's being televised live from up here, so anybody who would prefer to go down there, and if other people come in during the course of the meeting, if people back there would be so kind as to explain to them that there is another room available to them downstairs, I would appreciate that very much. Thank you. I don't know, David.
All right, now we're going to do our business. The first item is the minutes from the 15th of July, and I have just noticed that this set of minutes does not have the attendance chart on it. So if there's a member who was not here on the 15th, or that was Rebecca, and anybody else, we will definitely amend the minutes to include the attendance. I apologize for that. But take a look through and see if there are any other additions or corrections. Oh, we'll fix the typos.
I noticed in the sections of the report that were, I still don't see it, that were assigned, I think I volunteered to do the
CBA, right?
CBA, and it's not mentioned in there. But
Oh, you're right. That's an omission. We'll correct that. Okay, any other members have additions or corrections?
none.
Okay. Yes, please, could we have a motion to approve as amended? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
So be it. We will correct and amend, and Ms. Stone, who was not present at the last meeting, has abstained. Okay. Then let's move on to the presentation of the report from HMFH, which unfortunately I always want to say is humph.
I won't tell you what we call it.
Better not, better not. Welcome, and I'll turn this over to you. Just introduce yourself and any colleagues who are present, and then you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Pip Lewis from HMFH Architects. I'm a principal at the firm, and we have been around for about 42 years, and we are in Cambridge, and we really focus on the design of schools, places for learning, and more than anything else, we do public education schools. This is Stephanie McNeil from our office, who's assisting with the study. We're very happy to be here and to see that there's such interest in the BSpace study. I work for a lot of communities, and you'd be surprised how many communities you come to a presentation like this, and there might be 10 members of the public in the audience.
This is Brookline.
This is Brookline, yes, yes. So we were asked to do a study, sort of a quick pace study, to take a look overall at the Brookline's district in order to talk about how different ways in which we might handle the increasing enrollment that Brookline is seeing. We were first brought on, as some of you know, to look at the high school enrollment, and we did a study of that. And of course, a study also needed to be done of the K-8 population, and also how the K-8 population relates to the high school population, so the two are not looked at in total isolation. We were asked to look at just about every combination of resolutions to the growing enrollment problem that you could envision, which included determining whether we can put additions at each of the, there are 8 elementary schools at the moment, at each of the elementary schools with the exception of the devotion school, which is at the MSBA right now for an addition and renovation, and the Runkle School.
Runkle.
Yeah, which has just been renovated. And even though there was just a renovation at Heath, that was included in the 6 schools for us to look at. We also looked at alternative sites for a standalone, a 9th K-8 school. And I'll go through all of these options with you. We then were also asked to look at different grade structure configurations between the high school and the K-8 schools, like if the K-8s go to K-6, giving each of the schools additional capacity without changing districts or anything like that. But obviously adding 2 grades at the high school, making it a very large high school population. And that meant we were looking at renovations to the high school, and at that scale we're looking at really whether we could do a second high school and where that would occur. I would remind everybody that in all of the K-8 solutions, there's also the high school to look at and to deal with. The first thing we did is just look at the current school situation and the population. This is at the elementary schools. This is the population that they have right now, and the areas that they have, the square footage, and the number of sections per grade that each of them has. What we have is a total of 5,065 students in the schools. And this is not saying that the schools as they might not be overcrowded. This really wasn't looking at that. This was just looking at what you have right now in the elementary schools, and then the need is to increase that to 5,670 students, or adding 605 students to the population. Now, just in terms of general terms, we looked at the fact that your goal with your classrooms is for K-3 that you would have 22 kids in a classroom, and in the grades above that you'd have 25. And if you crunch those numbers, with 605 additional kids, you get 26 additional classrooms. That number plays out in a lot of the different options that we will be looking at. The first option that we looked at was trying to look at placing additions at all 6 of the schools. As we did that, we looked at the new Lincoln Elementary School, and we looked at the Pierce School, and we actually could not see a way of easily adding on to those schools. The intention was to see if we put in a number of classrooms into those schools, whether we could handle the overall population. For 6 schools, and the hope was that you might be able to add a few classrooms at each school and accommodate the population growth. For 6 schools, we found that we couldn't do that. For 2 of the schools, they were really not practical. And so we started looking at this as really a 4-school option. And those 4 schools would be the Baker School, the Heath School, the Driscoll School, and Driscoll and and Lawrence. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So what we found is if we were able to add at 6 schools, you would be looking at 4 or 5 classrooms per school. But with only 4 schools, you have to add 6 or 7 in order to get those in. So we did a study and we estimated what that would cost on each of the schools, and that was one of the options that we looked at. There were some issues with that direction, which is articulated here. One is that if you're placing small additions of mainly classrooms only on the schools, that it's a possibility that those would not be reimbursed by the MSBA. The MSBA being the organization, the Mass School Building Authority, that funds the schools, a lot of the schools' reconstruction. And when we first were looking at this and thinking maybe if we're adding just a few classrooms on each school, this is less of an issue, but adding up to 7 classrooms is a lot of additional classrooms to add in. The other thing we were looking at with that is if you add 7 classrooms, you really run the risk of overcrowding the schools. This is because you're just adding classroom space. You're not adding the necessary common spaces. And we've articulated them here: the science, the art, the music, the cafeteria, the library, and other support spaces, which includes maybe some of the teacher support spaces, teacher planning spaces, as well as administration, nursing spaces, and things like that. We thought that this option is also logistically challenging, and that's because working on this many multiple projects around the city, all in occupied school buildings, will be challenging logistics for the school for the town to work with. And just repeating the fact that we found that at 2 of the schools, at Lincoln and Pierce, it really wasn't practical to add at those schools. So we also looked at this option here of adding classrooms at 3 schools. And in this option, we were going to look at doing a more extensive renovation where you're really driving in and looking at those core spaces. So in the end, you'd wind up with a larger school, but not an overcrowded school. You would have the science rooms, the music rooms, the cafeteria, the library, and those sorts of spaces that you need. What we did here is, for the purposes of this exercise, is we left out the Baker School. We left out the Baker because of its location on the extreme southern edge of the town. Our understanding is that most of the population growth that you're having now is in the northern portion of the town. Most of the people are in the northern portion of the town. And it just wasn't really helping with that. And so we put the Baker in orange, and we say, will the site accommodate the modulars? The answer is yes, or will it accommodate expansion? But does this expansion help the Brookline School District in terms of its need for preserving districts to the greatest extent that is possible and adding space where space is needed? And the answer there was no. So in this option, we really looked at adding on to the 3 schools, just Driscoll, Heath, and Lawrence, which are 3 schools that we looked at, and we saw that, well, we could add on to them. And this is showing the old, the new Lincoln School, and the new Lincoln School is really hemmed in on all sides with homes and property. The this area here, where at first I was thinking we might be able to take that down and put in a 2-story classroom wing, but that's actually an historic barn that was moved to that site. And so I concluded that would not happen. The only other space on the site really is the playfield, but because it's really your only open playfield, we didn't consider that that was a practical option for expansion onto the building. The other portions of the building really are right up against very small space between it and the adjacent property lines. Also, just the nature of the building makes it difficult to like add on in the front or something along those lines. There's also some parking spaces in the rear that you could theoretically add on to, but we think that would cut down on the amount of parking and really hurt the vehicular circulation through the site. So this is just a picture of the barn to show that we concluded that that actually was not a place where we might do expansions. This is the play area, which, because it's the only real broad open space at the school, we concluded that that also was not a practical area to do expansions at the new Lincoln School. And this is just an example of the way the other homes and buildings are built right up against the Lincoln School with no additional site to expand. At the Pierce School, which is really is built out, right to the street edge on School Street and on Harvard, and we wandered through the interstitial spaces behind it and among it, and it really is a very tightly constructed site. Again, I don't see any option for adding additions onto that site. It comes very close to adjacent commercial buildings that face the commercial street there. This is the school. This is the historic building of the school. Very crowded against the town hall with just very small play spaces, sort of finding little niches in between wings of the building. And the only possibility there was if you actually were to take some move to take down the historic building and replace it with like a 3-story building, but you'd be removing a lot of classroom space in order to add a little bit more classroom space. We thought that that was not possibly the most constructive way to go on this particular site. So looking at the 3-school option, we find that because in the 3-school option, what we're looking at doing is really going in and doing a more complete renovation of all the core spaces and things like that. Really looking at the MSBA guidelines, working with the program of the schools, so that you're not only expanding the student population, but you're expanding the shared spaces for the school. You're providing the science rooms that are required, the art, music, library, cafeteria space is required. It would meet MSBA funding. Now, an oddity here is that one of those schools, the Heath School, was just renovated and added onto by the MSBA. And that might cause an issue with the MSBA in terms of a request to expand a school that they just finished expanding. And because there are 3 schools here that would need to be done, one possibility, one thing we've seen happening in some other communities like Newton and Cambridge, is that both towns that have multiple schools that they need to do, they're doing an MSBA funded school, and then they're doing a non-MSBA funded school, and then they're doing an MSBA funded school, and then they're doing a non-MSBA funded school. They saw that as the only way they could keep the process of reconstruction moving quickly enough to meet the schedules that they had with enrollment. Otherwise, it can be a very slow process. And so I just suggested that if you take a strategy like that with these 3 schools, that the Heath School might be the one you decide to skip over MSBA funding. Now, this is just me talking about a possibility. That would be up to the town to determine how to strategize that. In this scheme, unlike the 4-option scheme, you really would have all the adequate support spaces. You'd have a full modern educational plant when you're done with it. And the thing about this scheme, by using those 3 schools, it really adds space where the space is needed. Because all of those districts, Driscoll, Heath, and Lawrence, are districts that could use additional space. And this is still logistically challenging because you still have 3 construction projects, which might either be done simultaneously or subsequently. If you do them simultaneously, you're taking on really a whole lot of different construction in town all at once. If you do them as subsequent construction, obviously there's a timing issue. It'll take you a number of years before you get all 3 schools online, and therefore you have the additional capacity of all 3 schools. So we looked at the Driscoll School, which really stretches out. And at the end of Driscoll School, it's a 3-story high building. At the end of the school, it has a modular gymnasium building that was built. And so we look at that as a place where we can add square footage. If that modular gymnasium is taken out, a new gymnasium is put in, and you could put in three floors of classroom space, so you could do a significant addition there with only minor impact on the open space for the project, for the campus, I should say. This play space on Washington Street all remains there, but the length of our addition that we're proposing creeps into where the tennis courts are, and so we're going to show you the tennis courts being moved up toward Washington Street. So here's the floor plan of that. All of this is existing Driscoll School. This, if you see the light dotted line there, that actually is the modular gymnasium which we're proposing to take down, and then we're adding a significantly larger 3-story high classroom wing here with a new gymnasium at the end. You see the tennis courts relocated toward Washington Street, the play area and the parking areas preserved. So everything to the left side of this dotted line is new construction, but you'll also see that there is new construction here where we're expanding, it's a slight expansion to the cafeteria in order so that you have the spaces sized the way they should be spaced, so that you don't have, with a larger student population, you don't have 4 or 5 lunch periods that you have to go through in order to feed the kids. In this case, because there's an uphill side to the school and a downhill side, we're showing the new classrooms facing Washington Street with a gymnasium located there. The building is sort of nestling into the hillside to manage the new bulk of the building. It would be very similarly scaled to the existing building. On the floor above that, where we have daylight on this side, we're putting in some of the larger classrooms, science and things like that. And then additional classrooms located here. Here's the upper portion of the gymnasium. And going up to the 3rd floor of the building, we have art and music, again, the bigger rooms in this direction, and then more classroom space there. And in doing this, we're able to get all the classroom space and the common space that's needed in the school, plus a sort of a regulation-sized gymnasium.
What's the delta on the classrooms? How many additional?
We're adding 9 classrooms.
Could you possibly do more?
Well, yeah.
Lots of common
so-
space.
In some cases, we're taking out common space, so that because we're expanding it. So that requires us to add additional classrooms. The way we worked at this is we took the population that the building is now, and we then projected it up to, if we add 9 classrooms, what the new population would be. We then put that into the MSBA's sort of spreadsheet for space guidelines, and that told us what size all the spaces need to be and the number of classrooms, and then we injected that into the building. And Stephanie's reminding me that in some cases, because of that method, when we're adding 9 classrooms, we're actually adding a little bit more than 9 classrooms because according to the MSBA space guidelines, the Driscoll School might be overcrowded as it is right now. So the way we're working at it, we're working at getting something that when you get up to the size of the building, when you add 9 classrooms, I don't know the population, It's on another slide, I won't go back to it. But you're getting a building that completely complies with MSBA guidelines.
It's currently 547.
So we'd be adding about 170 to that. And so we then are just calculating the size and the number of classrooms that should be at that size. And dividing that amongst the 3 schools, we're getting the entire capacity that we need to add to the town. Next, we look at the Heath School, very recently renovated and expanded. But we determined that there was site space so that we could add additions onto this school. What we found was that there is an existing gymnasium, by existing, I mean, it's part of the original building, located here, which has some upper floor, some small sort of mezzanine located space that's not handicap accessible. And so what we propose to do here is to take this down and construct a larger wing here, which I'll show you in a moment, along with a smaller wing located here. The Heath site sort of slopes up in just about all directions, and so we're sort of working with the terrain of the site to come up with something that we thought would work. So we put a small addition here so that we're preserving the sledding hill that's located over here. And so the addition comes out to about where the play area is now. And then we're sort of making use of this area here for the main new addition. Now, it's pointed out that when the renovation was done, there was some stormwater retention systems added into the project right about here. And the addition that we're talking about is going on top of that. So that is something that the town has just invested in, as I understand, about $300,000. That would have to be relocated according to this scheme. And you can, along with the fact that this was just financed by the MSBA, is one of the questions that one might have about this. But you might also look at this as a step on the way to solving the entire problem of the Brookline School District, and if reconstructing that stormwater detention area might well be worth it in the big picture of things. Going to the plans for that, you can see, this is a little bit hard to see, but you can see there's a light dotted line there where we took down the old gym, and then there's a dotted line here. Everything over here is new construction. This is all existing. This is existing. And then there's a dotted line here, and that's that new wing that we added. Here's the sledding hill here. This is a 2-story wing located here. This is, again, buried into the hillside, so that these facilities over here, just like in the existing, don't have windows, but the classrooms here, 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 here are all exposed to daylight here. And then you have a new gymnasium placed on the end of this new wing, some of the bigger rooms like science and music, you have a music room located here, which we're converting to art, so art and art are next to each other, and then we're creating 2 new music rooms in the facility, which would be required by the MSBA.
A question,
yes.
There's no addition here, in contrast to Driscoll, to the common space, cafeteria, auditorium, library. That presumably you've checked and that fits the guidelines.
Yeah, and
it's close. It is a little bit shy of what MSBA would be recommending. However, knowing that the library and the cafeteria were literally just finished up with expansion, we felt in that scenario that it was already just staying with the existing facilities.
And they weren't wildly undersized.
Okay, all right, because your total 9 new classrooms is another
170 kids, something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How many classrooms were added with the first?
Do you know the exact number?
It was
Can
more than
can I just hold on? You may not have been here when I made an announcement in the beginning that it was a least listening activity for the audience. and we'll ask the questions. I apologize for that, but that's the way we have to do it.
Okay, so if we go upstairs here, you'll see the second story addition here. Because we're up high enough, all of these classrooms have windows that see daylight. And here, this is really just a one-story addition, and so you just see the upper portion of the new gymnasium located there. So we also looked at the Lawrence School, and one of the things that we discovered in our talking with the town attorney, trying to figure out which sites are protected, which sites are not protected, which sites are public parks, which are public playgrounds, which are historic, which are not historic. One of the things that we came across is that while the Lawrence School sits on a piece of property, which is about like this, which is not a protected piece of property, it sits within a park that is shaped like this. It is a protected open space. And what that means, in order to build on it or to use it for some purpose other than recreational, you'd have to do an Article 97 swap, which means you have to get state legislative action to authorize the placing of this property into another use other than recreational. I think a 2/3 vote of the legislation. Now you would also need to, if you take out half of that park space or something like that, you'd have to reclaim that recreation space elsewhere in town. However, we discovered that in 1929 there is a strip of space that is from the back wall of this addition here, 80 feet wide, so going to about there, and 220 feet back from the sidewalk, going back to here, that was deeded to the city for the purpose of building the school, or building a school. And so we looked at possibilities for additions to this, being the parking lot located here, as well as looking over in this area here. Now, the Lawrence School right now is getting modular classrooms located here. So in the four-school option, where you're not increasing the core of the school, just increasing classroom space, all that we would be proposing is that somewhere over here, 2 additional modular classrooms would be added to the school. A pretty minor change from what's going on with the school right now. However, with the 3-school option, where we're looking at expanding core space, one of the things that we found is that even though additions were put on this in the 90s at some point, the core space here, the cafeteria, the library, are actually all significantly undersized. And so we looked here at how we could take this existing footprint of the building, and what we found is we needed to add both over here and over here in order to really create a building that was large enough to accommodate the new population. So if that were to be the case, the modulars would go in as they're planned. When this matriculated through the MSBA process, which might be a number of years depending on how things are paced, those modulars might be taken and relocated elsewhere. And then a permanent addition done to this, and I say permanent, not that the modulars can't be permanent also, but because you will see when you look at this that really what we were proposing there is a cafeteria to go in that parking lot area. The current cafeteria is really just a little bit larger than a classroom space located in the basement right there. So in this scheme, we found that we had to do extensive changes to the main school in order to make it work. The school that results from this is a pretty neat school, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. So what we did is we took the cafeteria that was located here and we established a cafeteria in the parking lot, essentially, with service and things like that located off of Newell. That with a new kitchen, et cetera, to create a new sort of common space for the school, and then more classroom space goes in here. We established new kindergartens facing onto the park here in that 80 by 220 foot space. That's the footprint of that space right there. Because we're building over here, we're actually blocking in where kindergartens used to be. So we are proposing that those spaces become some of the more, just to go back to the basement space, you see science classrooms and science classrooms here where the library is at the moment. That these spaces would become, while they have natural daylight looking into a sort of a courtyard there, but kids are only in there for like a period of day. They're not spending a large part of their day there. And the kindergartner kids get the, like the best place with on-grade access out to the park, located right here. So I just think that works out pretty well for the school. And then as you go up through the building, we're adding additional classroom space. Those spaces in the middle there become band room and some support space. And then we're building additional classrooms here. Above the cafeteria, you'll see that we place the library. And you begin to get the sense on this building that the changes, if you're revising things here, here, and here, are really more extensive than on the other two schools that we talked about. Then up on the third floor, more classroom space here, and the existing school located here. Now, and that's really the upper portion of the library located there. Now, this is just an indication of what we were talking about earlier, where we're adding more than 9 classrooms because we're taking out a lot of classrooms to repurpose them as things, and so we're having to add additional classrooms in order to compensate for that. But in order to make a school that works, you sort of have to make these moves with the Lawrence School. And I think the result is a sort of a nicely laid out school with good exposure on the classrooms, but it actually eats up most of the parking that you have. So we also looked at one elementary school plus the high school. As I said, with all of these elementary school options, you have to remember that you are still looking at a high school renovation or addition or building a second high school or something like that. And so with the task of creating a space for a new high school, the positive thing is there, ninth school, is that you can build the school without any disruption to any of the existing schools. The schools that we've looked at, the options that we've looked at, you could use Old Lincoln as swing space, as you've done in the past, in order to minimize that disruption. But to build a new K-8 school from the ground up, everyone simply stays put in their existing schools. We're saying that this is a cost-effective solution. Obviously, the new school would be eligible for MSBA reimbursement, and we were just finding that it was actually a less expensive option than some of the multiple school options. But redistricting, a new school, if it's located in a beneficial area, districts do become centralized around their schools, versus if you locate a new school in another area, maybe a southern area, where the districts become very lopsided. One of the sites we looked at was the Baldwin site. Another site we looked at was the Old Lincoln School. And they seem to have very different implications with the redistricting. But in each case, obviously, you have to establish a new 9th district. In some of those options, like at Baldwin, the districts seem very lopsided. And what we mean by that is because most of the population is in the north. Most of the population growth that we're looking at is in the north. The districts, if you place a new district at Baldwin, all the districts sort of creep up to the north, and so several of the existing schools wind up really on the southernmost boundary of their districts. So that you could be in this situation where you live across the street from the Driscoll School, but you can't go to the Driscoll School. You're going to a different school. Now, if a concept school is developed, however, that can get around the redistricting problem. So concept school would be like a STEM school or something that's based on some particular focus. It might be based on the arts. It might be based on technology or science. And if that's the case, it would draw school kids from each of the 8 districts and into this 9th school. That way, it's pulling population away from the district, so you don't have to redistrict. And I think the big problem with that is it's a little bit unpredictable as to what the demand for something like that would be without really further study of the situation. So we looked at sites around the city, and first we looked at, well, not first, but we looked at Amory Park, and we looked at the Lynch Recreation Center as possibilities for building schools there. Both of these had to be taken off of the table because they are really both located entirely in floodplains. And if a building is in a floodplain, someone had told me at first, you know, I think part of Amory Park is in a floodplain, but the tennis courts aren't. But we looked at the floodplain map. It's entirely in a floodplain, including the tennis courts. You can build in a limited way in floodplains, but when you're doing that, you really have to, the floodplains are storage capacity when the water rises. And a floodplain that is storing a certain amount of water has to continue to store that amount of water. So if you're taking out a little bit of it, you have to recreate that storage capacity in that general area at that elevation. We've done that before, you know, enough times when you have a small intrusion. You know, a roadway has to clip off part of a floodplain or something like that, so you change the contours so to compensate for the storage capacity. But I would say there's no way at Amory Park or at Lynch that you can put an entire school on that property. There's just no way to find the compensatory storage capacity in that area. It would be just much too great. We then looked at the Baldwin School and the recreation center that it's adjacent to. And while the Baldwin School itself is a site that can be built on, we looked at it, it's not protected as Article 97 open space. But the School Recreation Center is protected as Article 97 recreation space. First of all, as we talked about before, it's not located in an advantageous area in town in order to accommodate favorable redistricting, and creates the awkward districts that we talked about before. Secondly, we say that construction may require Article 97 land swaps because in some of the options we're looking at, the site that the Baldwin School itself is located on is not very large. And so in some of the options we're looking at the new school construction creeping over into the School Recreation Center. And in the discussion with the town attorney, it was said, well, we could do that as long as you compensate with an equal amount of land somewhere else. And the small amounts that we were talking about in certain options, I think we'll show you some that where there's bigger amounts being talked about, could actually be done right on the site. Like the tennis courts, for instance, are on the Baldwin school site, and so they're not protected. So you could promise to protect them in perpetuity as recreation space and never use them for anything else. And that's the kind of thing that she thought would be a relatively easy Article 97 swap compared to certain other things. And it is a location that could be used as a concept school that would get around the problems of the redistricting. The next site we looked at is Old Lincoln, and it has an advantageous location in town. It would require redistricting, but the districts that we've seen on the district maps, in each neighborhood, the school is located in approximately the center of the district. And it would give no disruption to occupied schools. I always interject this, and I'll show you in the floor plans, is that one of the big disadvantages to the Old Lincoln School is what it does to traffic on Route 9 when you drop off and pick up. And so I just had this, well, you could buy the U-Haul place next door and use that as a pull-off area and parking area to take all that traffic and queuing off of Route 9. Another problem of the Old Lincoln School is that the air quality inside of the school, because it's located on a relatively busy highway, let's say. And I just wanted to make this bullet here because I really think that any significant renovation to the Lincoln School would solve that problem, because you'd solve it by working with the HVAC system. We most recently have been doing a system on most of our schools called displacement ventilation, where we'd be bringing in outside air. At Old Lincoln, you'd be bringing in from the top of the school and the back of the school toward Walnut Street, where the air quality is better. You'd be filtering and cleaning the air, and the air quality inside of the school would be fine. There is the playground, which is located across the street, and you would still have the air quality issues at the playground. I will point out again that Old Lincoln could be used as a concept school, and that would get around the issues that you might see around the disruption of redistricting the school. So looking at the Baldwin School, so Baldwin is located here. Baldwin, if I want to say, owns this property about back to here, like to the tennis courts and then across. And then from Heath through to Hammond Street, this is all the Sewell Recreation Center. And the dividing line is located right behind this gymnasium that's here. Now, to be honest, as I was working with this site, this gymnasium is not the best building in the world. It's not in the best condition in the world. And so I was always actually trying to take it out and replace it with a new gymnasium as part of a school facility there. And that's why we were creeping into the Article 97 swap issue. But the idea is, if we're taking just a little bit there to rebuild that, maybe you simply promise to use the tennis courts in perpetuity for recreational space. It's a relatively challenging site still, because Old Baldwin is located on a hill, and then there's a big dell located here, and then it rises up again as you get over to here. So there's a lot of changes in grade. You might conceivably use some of those changes in grade to hide the bulk of a new building. A gymnasium might sort of nestle down in that low area. It is in an historic district. It's in the Chestnut Hill Historic District, and so there would be, it's not in Newton's local historic district, but it's in a state historic district, and so we would have to do a historic district review of that, which I think, if you wanted to build there, you would simply take that on. The Sewell Recreation Center also has play area here and here, And the high school is we show that later on. So you'll see later on in this presentation some buildings that occupy this part of the site here. There's a parking area there, and there's a soccer field. This field has been beautifully redone with artificial turf. One of the advantages to building on this site is that you could get all of your traffic coming off of this existing driveway that's located on Hammond Street. One of the things we're trying to do is to not get a whole lot of traffic on Heath, because Heath is a relatively small road, and we think it could easily be overwhelmed with the vehicle circulation for a large new school. So here you see, and this is just the footprint of a school that we did in Wellesley, the Sprague Elementary School. And we were just trying to give a sense of what an elementary school added to this site would look like. And in this case, you'll see that we're attaching it to the back of the existing Baldwin School, which is exactly actually what we did at the Sprague School in Wellesley. There's a small existing school that we added on, a much larger addition onto the back of it. And it also steps down a hillside like this would need to do. And just because we weren't playing with the configuration very much, but this gets a new gymnasium, and then you can see the old gymnasium here taken out. And what we're just beginning to look at is maybe we could do some sort of a loop road that comes in off of Hammond and back out. You might have parking located here. You'd preserve the soccer field, and you preserve the field that's there. The downside to that is, unlike this, this is an old plan that shows the footprint of houses, but in actuality, this piece of property was developed relatively recently, and there's actually two large houses located right here and right here, very close to the property line. So we were a little bit uncomfortable with how the size of this building would feel next to these houses that are located so close by. So we simply point that out. And we look at the possibility of placing the school further back in the site, actually on the Sewell Recreation Center site. You'd have to do a more significant Article 97 land swap. So that's a more significant undertaking that would have to be figured out. What land would you swap it with, and questions like that. But we could see that you could get a long queuing lane sort of pulling through there, looping around a parking area, and then back out. In that way, keep the building further away from these large homes that are located there. There's a wooded area, and there's some flexibility, so you could mask the scale of the building much better in this particular direction. So that's just one possibility there. Now we looked at Old Lincoln. Old Lincoln, just for orientation's sake, this is the building that's been traditionally used as swing space, as a swing space school in town. I understand it may be nobody's favorite school. It has a parking garage located here. I mean, it's an odd building because it sort of sits up on a platform over Route 9, over Boylston Street. And it has a parking garage located here that I understand has some work that needs to be done. It has a sort of a wild hillside here, just sort of an undeveloped piece of the property located here. The property goes right about to the fence line, which is located there. And this is the U-Haul place that I was talking about. And it seemed to me that if you were expanding Old Lincoln, you could improve the air quality inside of the building and make it perfectly acceptable. You could build a new gymnasium, because it has a small gymnasium located down in the basement here, a new gymnasium which you could nestle into this space to hide its bulk. And you could add additional classroom space that's needed along here. And that this extension of the main core of the school off in that direction could essentially daylight here at an area here. And if people were willing to do so, you could do a pull-out lane that comes off of Route 9 like that, and also has parking located in it. So this is what we're showing here. Here's the gymnasium. Here's the existing school, which happens to be mostly in blue because we're just putting some of the big spaces down in the lower levels of it. And this is a new classroom wing that's located here. And here is the U-Haul site showing the pull-out space and the parking areas. Just the second, well, that was the ground floor plan. This is the first floor plan, duplicating what was below, upper portion of the gym, upper portion of this space that's now would be used for music, and it makes use of the high volume of that space in order to get a great music facility put in there. New art classrooms and new classrooms located here, and also cafeteria expanded in the back of the building there. We go to the second floor, and you get to the existing auditorium. You're over the roof of the gymnasium at this point. There's the possibility that you might build a play area or a green roof on the roof of the gymnasium. That's a kind of thing that's frequently a great idea, but is relatively expensive to do. So you might decide you couldn't afford to do that. And then more classroom space located here. We're proposing that a new elevator would be located here in the building to supplement the elevator that's there, because it becomes a very sort of long facility. And then a third floor on the building with more classroom space, the upper portion of your gym, and then existing classroom spaces here. These classrooms overlook the top of the new gymnasium there. We would be proposing in a scheme like this that you look at building a pedestrian bridge coming from the ground floor area and going over to the play area across the way, so that small kids could safely cross Route 9 without having to cross at the crosswalk that's located here. So that was an important sort of traffic safety thing that needed to be done. It's similar to the aerial bridge that you have at the Pierce School, with the exception it's going across Route 9, which is a state highway, so it has more permitting issues and things like that. And also, because the bridge, unlike the one at Pierce, would need to be handicap accessible. So you'd either have to put a ramp system on the far side of it or an elevator. The convenient thing about it is that the building sits on a platform, so that it really is just starting from the ground floor area, from the first floor area here, and going right across. So you're not building the transition up and over twice. You're just coming straight out from your main floor and then going down once you get across the street. So we also looked at, as I said, grade reconfigurations. And one possibility, because again, with all of those elementary school schemes, you still have the high school to tackle. And so even if you did one big elementary school project, you'd still have you'd have a high school project also. And there is one solution that was come up with that gives you just one large construction project, period. And that is to say, what if we change the grade configuration of your K-8 schools to K-6? And then the high school becomes 7 to 12. Now, that's great for the K-6 schools because there's no redistricting involved. You have a lot of additional capacity. And so you can handle in one fell swoop the additional enrollment that you have. But it creates a huge high school. So the probable solution there is to create a second high school.
And Pip, you can also, in that scenario, move all of your pre-Ks back into those
Yes.
K-6, therefore
Yes.
making them all pre-K to 6 buildings.
Yeah, you're right. They would become pre-K to 6 because the BEAT program would move entirely back into the elementary schools. There'd be enough space for that. Space for that plus space for the additional K-8 enrollment. One of the advantages of the K-8 solution is, of course, kids occupy their elementary school for a long period of time. They grow up there. It gives them the fewest number of transitions. And one of the interesting things about this is that you still have a small number of transitions. You still have one transition from elementary school to high school. It just occurs 2 years earlier. So you have 7 years in one school, and then you go to the high school for the rest of your education. If you created 2 high schools of about the same size, we think that there's different ways of interpreting capacity of a high school depending on school policies and things like that. But one way of looking at the high school, the existing high school, is that the current capacity right now is about 1,900 students. And if you did this, you would need to create a second high school of 1,880 students. So you'd have 2 high schools in town that are actually about the same size. This relieves the overcrowding in all of the elementary schools, and it consolidates your construction projects into one construction project. This we were seeing as being a cost-effective solution compared to some of the other solutions. Not the cheapest, but not the most expensive. The second high school would certainly be eligible for MSBA reimbursement, and that gives you some advantages over some of the ones that may be only partially eligible for MSBA reimbursement. There are some challenges, though, and the question is, where would you build such a large new facility in Brookline? Well, I could suggest building it in Woburn. And the thing there is that the school of this size would be about 300,000 square feet. Now, after joking, I'll show you a couple of ways of building it in Brookline. The 2 possible sites we're looking at. One is the Baldwin Sewell Recreation Center, which would definitely require an Article 97 land swap. This school would be larger than the school that I just showed you, and we'll show you a school located there in a second. It would be easier to locate there a smaller high school of 800 to 900 students, and a larger school of about twice that runs the risk of really overwhelming the site. Now, at Lars Anderson Park, which is a very large park in the town, one of the things that we have discovered is that Lars Anderson Park was given to the city for the purpose of public education and public recreation. And you could, therefore, without an Article 97 land swap, you could build on this site. You could put a school on this site. We understand it's a beautiful park. I live in Jamaica Plain, so I'm at Lars Anderson Park every once in a while. So we walked around the site to look at where the best places to place a building of this scale might be. And I'll show you in a second. We concluded here that a site along Avon Street might be the best thing to do. But rather than going through that, let me go to the illustrations. This is just a Google sort of overview of the site. And to give orientation, the site occupies all of this property like that. The site was a former estate of a gentleman named Lars Anderson who married into the Weld family. His mansion burned down or was demolished some time ago. The remaining carriage house is right here, and that's the auto museum that you all know. There's also at the top of the hill here, there's an ice skating rink. The site is basically a hill. The crest of the hill is right about here, and then the hill goes down to Goddard Street, located here. Yeah, this is Goddard. This is Newton. This is Avon Street. Here's the Park School. The road to give you access to both the Auto Museum and the rink curls up the side of the park here, and then curls down the back once it gets to a parking area that's located here. There's also various historic buildings on the site, like the Putteram School is located there. Located over here, there's softball fields, and then there's I'm not actually sure what this is called, but it's like a more developed sort of formal garden area of the site, all oriented around a beautiful pond. Also on the site are an array, sort of a messy array of like DPW buildings located through here. And I think when most people think about building on this site, they think, well, why don't we build there? One of the things that we found to our surprise is that the Jamaica Plain, or the City of Boston property line, goes right, city limits, goes right through there, just gracing that side of the building, of that DPW building there. So that actually this green space here, which looks like part of the park, and is part of the park, but seems to be in Jamaica Plain. It doesn't seem to be in Jamaica Plain, it's in Jamaica Plain. And it may be owned by Brookline, and we haven't quite gotten to the bottom of whether Brookline could actually build something on that property they own, but is in Jamaica Plain. And and so to not be in that wedge of land there, there's actually much less space here than you think. And so we looked at, and I want you to all sit down before I show you this next slide, because what this is showing, what this next slide is showing you, is the size of the high school that we're talking about at 1,880 kids. And it's a little bit hard to see, but we just did it as a big rectangular box. This is 4 or 5 stories high because it sort of steps down the hill. We placed it so we're trying to avoid the Auto Museum, but we're incorporating that as a part of the school. But it really does come down to Newton. And we've also talked with, although it hasn't been done yet, that we could make a taller building that would have less of a footprint and therefore be pulled further back off of the street. But this sort of thing is a large intrusion onto the site. Then we said, well, is there something better to do? And this is still a very large building, but the reality here is that this actually has a much less impact on the site. And this is because Avon Road goes all the way through here like this. And there are very few abutters on Avon Road. The biggest abutter is the Greek Orthodox Cathedral, which doesn't open onto Avon at all. In fact, it has a wooded area located here. And then the first houses are here. And some of those houses, I'm not really sure which ones are actually owned by the town of Brookline, as I understand. And there is a hilltop here, so that when we go to sort of a little three-dimensional animation, I'll show you something surprising about that. So you see the big building. You have to be careful to place. You have to be close enough to place the person on Goddard. Yeah. So from Goddard, it actually disappears below the crest of the hill, which we think is sort of amazing. And we so you can go back up, or maybe just go back. Yeah, and so spin around, look at it from the other side, look at it from Avon. So from Avon, it is quite a large presence, 4 stories high, long, but there's actually nothing on Avon. Avon becomes a very nice, long queuing area for you. also the area, the drive located here. And it's even possible you could do something with a green roof to carry the hillside sort of over the top of the building or something like that. But it is a big presence on Lars Anderson Park. We simply wanted to show you that from Goddard Street, you really, the hill actually masks the bulk of the building. Okay.
Back to the numbers.
What would it look like from the park school?
Do you want to go back to that?
From which view?
So
From the park school
So
direction.
spin around. That's Goddard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
A different part of Goddard.
Is it? No, that's not the.
Oh,
You've got to go.
There you go.
Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
So Park is located like here.
Further to the left.
Further to the left?
Yeah, over there.
Okay. For here?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just put a person right there.
Right.
What you do is you place a person and you can see what the person can see. Now, what that doesn't get is that actually is a quite wooded area, so you wouldn't see just an open view of it like that. But from the softball field, from most of that curving to Goddard Road, once you get behind the crest of the hill, you don't see the building.
Pip, can I ask you a question? The assumption here is a 7 through 12 building of 1,880
Yeah,
students.
this is-
You said in an earlier slide that if you're talking about a second high school that's more in the 800-900 student range, which is something this group's talked about in terms of a 9 through 12, that there's actually a second possible location other than Lars for that, and that's in the Baldwin area. Is that right?
That might go in the Baldwin school.
Might
Yes,
work
exactly.
there. That would need to be
Much
looked
better,
at
yes.
further.
You're right. When I look at the 1,880 student school at Baldwin School, I say, hey guys, that doesn't work. When you look at a school that's half that size, we think we could make it work because it becomes incrementally larger than that elementary school
Right.
that we were showing you, but it's not twice the size of the elementary.
Thank you.
Okay, so then we started talking about the costs of some of these options. And we looked at first this option of adding small additions, just classrooms, to the 4 elementary schools. And so you can see, if you can read the numbers there, that the cost of that on a per school basis is about $3 million or something along those lines. So that the total cost of that is about $11 million, sort of rounding, using round numbers. Always remember when you're looking at the K-8 schools that there's also a high school. And so from our high school study, we were plugging in the number 65 million, which is really just one of the several options that we looked at the high school. And this is not a new high school. Because I'm not sure that we looked at a new high school during the high school study. Do we know the cost of a new high school? I don't think I don't have the numbers of a new, smaller high school.
Right.
Yes. Yes, Alan.
The numbers here, in wherever it's relevant, are net of MSBA?
No. These are numbers before you get to MSBA.
No MSBA on this.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
There's a good summary, actually.
These are all modular.
Yeah, so
tests, no MSBA.
this is like talking about the construction costs, and then there'll be a summary. Because as we were putting this all together, it was getting very complicated, so we started pulling things apart into several spreadsheets. And so this is all the 4 classroom, just adding classrooms to each school summary for construction costs. It gets you to about $75, $76 million, including the high school.
Could I actually ask you to,
Yes.
I appreciate that this is your presentation, but I would go to the summary page, which
Okay.
is much easier, and then if you want to then peel back the onion, that's fine, but it's better to show us the whole onion first.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question about the high school? The $65 million estimate, is that for the sort of meeting option of having an addition on Tappan Street and then taking down the old gym? Okay, so that was sort of the middle option,
I
right?
think it was actually
No, that was
the more expensive option.
Full-blown option, where it was the Tappan Street full science lab addition and the
Okay.
new addition where the
So that
existing
gives you a
sports
pretty
gym
decent
is.
high school experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Plus, you moved out all the administrative space, so it's maximized.
And we used that option because it was, educationally, it was like sort of the best option.
There were
That
something like 17 classroom spaces that were available, plus then you did these additions and you kind of made it work.
Yeah, and you had a new, you had a new science cluster also, whereas the other options didn't have a new science cluster. But each of the other options was less expensive, so.
And I just want to be clear, because I think even among ourselves, there's a little confusion. You're talking about using renovations at the high school, including the Schluntz gym, plus the science wing addition. You're not talking about the Tappan gym as part of it, or are you?
Right, so if I can summarize, we looked at three main options,
Right.
let's say. One of them was.
The question is, which
priced
one
here.
does this
Yeah.
$65 million?
So the $65 million, the big one. It's the one where we relocate the 18 classrooms that are in the Tappan Street Academic Building.
Right.
Not the Tappan Street Gym, but
Right.
just that side next
Right.
to where the principal parks. And building a new facility there for science and some other things.
Right.
And then once that gets taken down, and once that gets
Built.
constructed, gets built, and also at the same time, we're renovating the gym at the Tappan Street Gym into a big modern competition gym. There are
Right.
two small gyms next to each other. We don't quite know why they're like that. It could be one big gym with
Right.
bleachers and
I
things like
think
that.
I just wanted to be clear, because I think you offered us a version in which there were classrooms where the Tappan Street gym is, and
Yeah.
that's not what we're
That's
talking
not this
about.
one. That
Okay,
was
that's all I wanted to be clear about.
Yes.
Right. So the Tappan gym continues to be a gym. The Schluntz gym turns into classrooms.
Schluntz
And there's
turns into classrooms.
another addition on the Tappan Street side.
Yes.
Got it.
yes,
Okay.
Yes.
And then just one further question on that. Does it require any other additional high school spaces, like 800 to 900 seats in addition? So is
No,
this-
this was accommodating,
That is the comprehensive-
if you keep the
that's the
grade
25.
structure
Okay,
9 to 12, this is accommodating the 2,500 students
okay.
that would grow into. It's 1,800 students at the moment.
So the four plus high school idea, however, does not factor in common spaces in any of those elementary schools.
Right, the 4+ high school, your elementary schools arguably would each be overcrowded.
When they're, the day they're
Yeah,
finished.
Because you'd have a lot of kids in them, but you would not have looked at expanding the common spaces.
Right.
The-
And that includes, I mean, you threw a lot into the definition up here of common spaces. You had science, music, art, not just cafeterias.
Yeah, shared
right?
spaces.
Shared spaces.
spaces.
All of those in most of those buildings would be short the day we open.
Yes.
Well, to put.
And the one that comes closest to not being is Heath.
To just expand on that a little further, I thought from what you said earlier that particular version might not satisfy MSBA because the common spaces would not meet their standards.
Right.
Okay.
And so
Just
that's
wanna
why
be
we
clear.
say that
I just want to
might.
be clear on that too, because I talked to them today, and that's not necessarily,
Mhm.
you know, if Brookline were to say this is the preferred option, we wouldn't be held to you can't do it because you're going to have more than 3 lunches. But the question would be how many people want to have their kid in a school
Okay.
that has more than 3 lunches, or a lunch starting at 9:30 in the morning,
Or,
right?
or no art rooms, or no music,
Right,
not enough
right.
music rooms, or science rooms.
But if
Right,
the only other options are taking park space,
I hear you.
people are going to be having a choice, right?
Well,
And these
they have
facilities
choices.
have an art room, they have a music room, but for the most part, with the size of schools we're looking at, it really requires 2 art rooms, 2 music rooms, and they usually do not have enough science labs.
Right.
So this is the summary that was being talked about.
Sorry, we got one more question.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Pip, this is on the, not on the dollars, but on the numbers of students in the buildings and the implications. So with the 4+ high school or the 3+ high school renovations, you're shifting population into buildings that are outside their attendance areas, right? We're taking care of a growth in population that's town-wide, but accommodating them in just a few of the schools rather than all of the schools.
Yes,
Is that right?
we looked at, so the first idea about the what has become a 4-school option was it was supposed to be a 6-school option. And the idea of the 6-school option was that it wouldn't require redistricting. But as it becomes a 4-school option and you're shifting population from all over the city into those 4 schools, it obviously, to me, would require shifting the lines of the districts. And then that becomes a little bit more so when you go with the 3-school option, because you have fewer schools that you're shifting the population into. So obviously those 3 schools, those districts would have to grow, and maybe the others would shrink a little bit, so the lines would move back and forth. I think that you're changing district lines at the borders. You're moving a block in this direction, 2 blocks in that direction, or something like that. So some people do switch from district to district. It's maybe less of an impact than adding a 9th district, where suddenly, you have a population that it belongs to a school that didn't exist before, and other things have to shift around significantly in order to accommodate this.
Though I think with the 3-school option, with one of the 3 being Heath taking an 8-classroom addition, with the next one being Driscoll taking a 9-classroom addition, I think we're going to see a little bit of the Baldwin phenomenon. Maybe not as bad as the Baldwin phenomenon, but there's going to be some of that, especially kind of where Heath and Runkle meet, and then perhaps even Driscoll, because we're going to see a shifting of the districts northward, starting from Heath. So there's going to be some of that Baldwin phenomenon.
I'm sorry, Neil, you're saying that in the 3-school?
Yeah, just because of the numbers, and because the Heath, I mean, Heath is not that far from, in terms of configuration, from where we were looking at Baldwin. Just one more thing on the numbers. So I have the back of the envelope that Driscoll would go from a school of 547 to a school of 770 approximately. Heath would go from 517 to 730, and Lawrence would go from 644 to 840. So we're also talking about substantially different schools.
Yes.
4 and 4+ per grade level schools, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 sections minimum, right?
I just wanted to be clear
Yes.
about what we're talking about. Thanks.
And
Essentially with 9, I mean, if you think about it, with 9, if you're adding 9 classrooms, you're adding a section per grade. So if it's a 3-section school, it would become a 4-section school.
And other than the 7 through 12 option idea, none of these address the fact that we're more and more renting space for pre-K. None of these propose pre-K solution create enough rooms for a pre-K solution other than that option.
That's true, and that doesn't show up as a plus or minus on
Right.
this at all, but
Right.
it is certainly something to figure in. Right. Okay, so just going over the overall cost summaries, you see here's the 4-school plus high school. Here's the 3-school plus high school, the 1-school plus high school, and the new high school. If we go down to the total project costs, this is before MSBA reimbursement. And if you read across there, that you see that you get $108 million for just adding the 4 at 4 schools, adding classrooms plus renovating the high school. So the lion's share of that money is actually the high school. 65 million of that is the high school, remember. The biggest of these was actually turned out to be the 3-school plus high school. That's because in addition to doing the relatively large project at the high school, you have these 3 schools that rather than just adding a few classrooms, you're doing a more overall renovation of the school in order to accommodate all of the modern educational needs. And that gets you to $160 million before reimbursement. The one high school, the one new K-8 school is a little bit more economical than that, and it's approximately $140 million. And then building a new high school, and this is a new 1,880 student high school for grades 7 through 12. That is approximately $150 million. Now, when you add in the MSBA reimbursement, and these are approximate, the MSBA always encourages us to warn people that you never know what their reimbursement is going to be exactly until you go through the process with them. But here we tried to acknowledge that they have a cap on construction costs in terms of what they reimburse. And we also made a judgment, which might not turn out to be correct, that in these numbers for the first option, we are not showing reimbursement by the MSBA of the 4 elementary schools. Now, as you're saying, Catherine, that might turn out to be incorrect, but that was just going off of our thinking. Well, let me see, we're not meeting any of their guidelines, so we're not going to get reimbursement.
For instance, the heat, for example, where we reimburse, MSBA reimburse.
Yes, yes. But even that, with the reimbursement for the high school, and reimbursement only for the high school, that takes the town's cost down to $75 or $76 million approximately. Now, with the 3 elementary schools plus the high school, here we were making a judgment that you would reimburse 2 of the schools, Driscoll and Lawrence, through the MSBA, and do Heath on your own, which again, that's might not be the strategy you take, but this is what these numbers show. And that takes the $160 million number down to about $110 million. For one one elementary school, one new K-8 school, plus a high school renovation, with getting the MSBA reimbursement, you're at about $91 million. And then if you build a new high school, 7 through 12 high school, the $150 million goes down to about $98 million.
I have a question. So the 26 classrooms, I want to just go back to that for a second. So the 26 classrooms, and I appreciate where the assumption comes from and the numbers of students projected. One of the things that we talked about in preparing for this is that 26 classrooms assumes that we have appropriate use of classrooms in all schools today. It assumes we aren't short as we sit here. And we believe that there's some number that we're short as we enter that conversation. Of course, what I forgot in all this is that in the devotion project, there is some addition of classrooms. We haven't figured out whether they're early ed classrooms, whether they're taking it to 5 sections per grade level or whatever, but there are some additional rooms in that project as well. But I just want to caution people that 26 is not an optimal number. It does not create it because we're not at some kind of optimal set of conditions today. We're short today by some number. Peter and I were kicking around the number of a dozen, right, that we may be short today. And the 26 classrooms is based on a projection that every class is going to be in that 630 range from this point on out.
Bill, when you say we're short 12 today,
Well,
you mean we're using suboptimal space, right?
It means we've taken the music room, we've taken the second art room, we've done whatever to use them as classrooms, and in a world where we're using these buildings in the right way, we'd have that second room, and that wouldn't be a classroom. So there's some number of makeup needed there to start.
Michael?
One point I think is worth worth making, one thing I think it's worth making that $100 million of expenditure, $100 million of bonds will increase the tax rate around 2.5%. So all of the, if you look at the last three options, you've got, they're all very, very close to that $100 million level. And you could, we could make a comment about, well, that's probably, therefore, differentiating between them should not be done on the basis of cost. One could say that. But I think it's worth just saying that that $100 million is about a 2.5% increase.
Great, that's very
Just what it
helpful.
goes up every year anyway. It's like adding another year's
Yeah, well,
increase,
it's
right?
gonna double it, basically.
Yeah, you
That's
get it.
just the
Right now,
construction,
we
that's
haven't
not the
included,
operating.
we haven't included
just-
the
that's just
operating cost
operating,
bump that we
right.
need, which is about 5% on top of that. But it's, I think it'd be useful to set that frame in people's mind.
Could I just ask one question? So Pip, on the 4 plus high school, it seems to me that that's the modulars, the modulars plus the high school ad reno and the 3, but it seems to me that the 3 plus high school, which is Lawrence, Heath, and Driscoll, with additions, you mentioned that the $159 million there is inclusive of other improvements to the buildings, not just the classroom additions, but other general improvements. So it's not a how should I say, it's an attraction in some ways, right? They would be improved for that.
They're not, I think it's important to say that the 4 plus is not equal to the 3 plus.
Yeah.
The results of a 3 plus presumably would mean those additions would create additional common spaces or expand or whatever's necessary,
Yes.
which the 4 plus option does not.
The 4 plus would result in arguably 4 overcrowded schools. The 3 plus does not result in overcrowded schools.
Well, taking
So, questions? Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I got a few questions, actually. Pip, in evaluating a second high school in Los Anderson, did you give any thought to how those district lines would be drawn? Like, what parts of town would go to which high school, how that would be split up?
I'm pleased to say that's not my job.
It's not,
I was going to say no.
Not my job either. No, okay. Just didn't know if you went there. I heard a comment that Heath needs more space, and I didn't know if that was absolutely true or not. Can somebody answer that one for me?
Dr. Lupini?
No, I mean, I'm not sure of the specifics of all of the MSBA guidelines, but I know we enlarged the library. I know we built the multipurpose room for reasons. I know we added to the cafeteria to reduce the building to X number of lunches. So no, I maybe not all of them because I'm not familiar with all of them, but I know those major ones we met in that project.
Yeah, and what we did at Heath is as you saw, we concluded we should leave the library and the cafeteria the size they are because they're close to where they need to be. They wouldn't be horribly undersized, but we did take, like, there's a single art room and a single music room, and we put in a second music room and a second art room. We put in science, which is, I think there's
There are two.
But but MSBA actually asks you for 4 when you get to these 700 student schools. And so we were putting in 2 additional ones there. And so we're also increasing the size of the gymnasium to their standard 6,000 square foot gymnasium.
Next one. I know that,
I thought what you were asking was a question that I also had, which is that you mentioned that the 3 plus option with Driscoll, Heath, and Lawrence
Yes.
put the growth in the schools where the growth in the population was, and that's what I didn't think was right. So
And I think we're thinking by comparison to doing the expansion at Baker, that our sense from what everyone is saying is that the additional school population further north in town is better than south in town. And that was, given the options we had, that was an improvement over if one of the schools was Baker. and
Oh, I see.
is not the result of a study of
Just
each district.
Closer
Just-
to where the population is.
Yeah, and also given the fact that we looked at Pierce, and we looked at New Lincoln, and we said, hey, we can't add here, so I can't add any capacity there, and we weren't looking at Devotion.
Right, no, I understand all that. It's just that the growth in the population, the most pressure is on our northeastern schools and
Yes.
not on the western part, so that's all. Thanks, sorry.
Pip, next one. I got two more, and then they're quickies. So I know this wasn't part of your charge, but a fairly recent suggestion I've heard is to move our early education program and kindergarten to off-site facility or facilities. Did you guys get any chance to, did you catch wind of that, and any off-the-cuff thoughts on that solution?
Well, not really. I mean, we've heard of it, and I wasn't, in the scope that I heard of it was really not pre-K and K. It was mainly pre-K, and I know that's something that's sort of being worked on to see if you can rent space for pre-K. And I actually have no idea whether we were renting space for all of the pre-K or some of it, or 6 classrooms or 12 classrooms or 18 classrooms. I just know that that's something that people have talked about, the fact is going on.
So the only thing I can say, Ken, to the pre-KK is, if you're talking about a single location, and I know some of the scenarios don't, and we actually talked about those quite some time ago, those multiple site options. A single location is 900 students.
Yep.
Between kindergarten and pre-K. That's a big building.
I understand.
And that's a lot of traffic. It doesn't create. If you take the 26 that are needed and you assume some number that we need beyond that because of being short at present, it actually doesn't solve the problem. Removing kindergarten from the buildings, and I think there's some question as to whether it puts you in that same conversation about whether you've gone away from your K to 8 model in your conversations.
Adds a
with
transition.
The MSBA.
Adds a transition.
And it adds a transition.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Last question. So Newton just spent, rumored, over $200 million on Newton North. Why is our second high school only a measly $100 million?
I don't know how to answer that.
Is Newton North a lot bigger than what we would have to build? That's my question, unfacetiously.
Well, unfacetiously, Newton North is a bit of a mystery to me because it is a very expensive school building. And I know there are some people who are associated here, but it is not, when you go through it, it's not a fancy building at all. However, it does have, I think, every facility in it that you can imagine. It has a swimming pool, it has a field house, and then it has a gymnasium. It has some very nice, tech labs and things like that. It's got a black box theater. It's got an auditorium. And so all I can think is that I can think of a couple of things. One is that maybe it hit the market at the wrong time. Two is on the amount of space that it built per student was very large compared to what most schools are. But honestly, when you go through that, I went through that building, just looking for all the marble and brass and things like that, and it's just not there. It's VCT, concrete block, and it's just interior-wise, it's a good sturdy school. So why did it cost whatever it was, $220 million? I don't know.
Thank you, Pip.
Could I just respond to that a little bit too? Because although I wasn't at the School Building Authority when the Newton North project was developed, I did happen to pay for $46 million of your statewide taxpayer monies for Newton North, and we paid, I think, $20 million towards a $54 million addition renovation of Newton South, which was completed in 2005. So this was my warning. Every time I hear about 2 high schools in Brookline, I moved to Brookline because it has 1 high school. And he didn't have the whole Newton South, Newton North thing going on, because that became a bifurcation in the community. Newton South was perceived as having gotten a very rich in 2005, addition of $54 million. So the North people said, well, geez, we need to keep up with that. And so this project, which started $120 million at its inception, even though it had 1,750 kids, and Everett High School had 1,750 kids, and was at $82 million at the time, we were already over for some reason in Newton at that point. And then it grew over to almost $200 million at that same time. But that becomes a bifurcation in the town, right? Because I had part of Newton's aldermen saying, forget about Newton South, we want Newton North. And forget about Newton North, we want Newton South to be paid for more quickly. So I just warn against that, because anytime you're dealing with a state bureaucrat like I used to be, you wind up with that sort of a bifurcation.
Thank you.
Other questions? Selectman Wyszynski.
Because my fear is that if one of our major additions is Heath, we're going to have some of what I'll call the Baldwin phenomenon. Have what you've done kind of maxed out the Lawrence and Driscoll sites? So I guess my question is, are there opportunities at Lawrence and Driscoll that aren't being taken advantage of, and perhaps do a smaller addition at Heath?
I see what you're saying, and we really didn't look at a two-school option, for instance. And
or a 2.5.
Yeah, or 2.5. And I would definitely say that Driscoll, not thinking about parking or traffic or anything, but just thinking about the space that's available, Driscoll could be a larger addition, and you could design that to sort of fit in with the existing building and with the terrain and preserve exterior open space and things like that. Lawrence, I think what we're showing is about as built out as you could get. It goes up the full 4 floors. It builds on both sides. As I show it, it doesn't have parking, so I don't think you have much additional space at Lawrence.
So I guess pedagogically, I'll throw it to the school.
Ask the superintendent.
No, go ahead.
Is that a direction that we ought to be looking at? Going a little bigger at Driscoll, can the school handle it? Is that desirable?
What did you project it at?
770 and the 3 plus.
So becoming another devotion.
Well, I mean, basically, we're talking about adding classrooms to accommodate 600 kids. So if it's at 3 sites and they're evenly distributed, it's 200 per site. If there's 2.5, it's got to be adjusted.
Oh, right, the 3-site plan and devotion in sort of that larger range, I think, is our best option for a number of reasons. I was going to sort of glom on and ask whether a larger devotion could be the third. That has the same problems, right, of getting to the point where it's too large. And then whether, as you've looked at this and as your group has looked at this, whether that even makes sense. Is that the right 3 schools, right? Is a devotion, Lawrence, Driscoll actually help with the totality of the problem more than a Heath, Driscoll? And I know you're familiar with the devotion work, so I guess I would ask the same question that Neil asked, is whether there's some opportunity to go larger as a third option instead of Heath as part of that devotion project.
Well, interestingly, devotion turns out to be one of the larger elementary school sites that you have. It's also the largest elementary school that you have. So because it was the largest elementary school, when we were looking at it, it seemed that you didn't want to go bigger than that.
Right.
Now, this was before I was handling the problem of all these kids, these 600 kids directly. And so could you go from 830 students, and add, or from 4 to 5 section school to a 5-section school? I'd have to say yes, because you have the space, and it's not like generous amounts of space like you might have in some of the suburban communities where you have a 25-acre site, so you just make your wing go a little bit further. So you might wind up building higher or denser or something like that. But certainly, compared to each of the other elementary school sites we've looked at, there's more space there to work with. it becomes a question of how big do you want
Right.
a single school to be, which.
And you're theorizing now about the shift of Heath. I mean, that would have to be tested.
Yeah,
Right.
that would have to be tested.
Right.
But my gut, having
Yeah, well,
been
you've done this,
involved
so,
in that,
sure.
is we're going to have some of the Baldwin phenomenon.
Sure.
We're talking about having, at this stage, a student population of 820 children at Devotion. If you add another 4 classrooms beyond, then that gets you to 900.
That's right.
And presumably, that means that you only need 4 instead of 8 at Heath. Is that correct? I think so. Or is it, we have not. So you reduce the impact, the effect that you're talking about by about half. Not insignificant, no.
So, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, these are just different iterations of a
Mhm.
three-school solution.
Right.
Which,
Right.
would need to be tested.
Right. Rebecca, you have another question?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that the K-8 subcommittee has already, in anticipation of this, has already scheduled a meeting on Thursday afternoon to take a look at the redistricting implications of any of these. So
Yeah.
we'll be able to run some of those and at least do, again, folks, it's just an experiment. It's like a thought experiment. It's not a proposal. It's just to show what what it might look like if we were to do a redistricting based on those proposals.
Well, I think it's important to say, no matter where you add classrooms, there is implicit, unless you add them in exactly the right place and exactly the right proportion, which we can't do, there's some redistricting that occurs.
Yes.
And there's a cohort of parents and students that are going to have to go through that, but we're trying to make a decision that is a multi-generational decision. And so, to some extent, we should be looking at where we think the population is going to be, and trying to put the classrooms there. And, whatever you do, redistricting is going to be a factor.
I had one more question. Pip, these are all, I don't know, for want of a better term, Baker neutral. Are we, we're not doing anything in this proposal to deal with the overcrowding at Baker?
We're really, except for the one that adds classrooms at Baker.
At all 6?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
or no, Baker is one of the 4.
Oh, it's one of the 4 plus,
Baker
right,
is
of
the one
course,
school
right.
that dropped off
Okay, yep.
for a more extensive renovation. So you would be, in that option, you'd be adding classroom space
Okay.
at Baker.
Okay.
And as I understand, it's, I might have, I bet it's a couple of classrooms that are needed at Baker or something like that, not a huge number.
Not
I
yet.
might be wrong about that. And I understand that things may happen that would change that, but those things that might happen are not in the numbers that we've been looking at. So we figured it was good to set that aside, and because that would increase your numbers if that happened.
Okay, thanks.
So Michael, do you have another question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a question about Old Lincoln. Looking at did you develop any cost data or estimates for the cost of doing the sorts of things you're talking about at Old Lincoln, which is a pretty substantial change to the school, combination of addition, a bridge over the road, an extensive HVAC system and so forth?
Yeah, we did do a cost estimate for Old Lincoln. The types of renovations that we're saying we're talking about are extensive, so it's not inexpensive. And it sort of approaches the cost of building a new building, but it's not quite the cost of building a new building. But we're talking about, completely redoing the mechanical system, electrical, redoing significant rooms like taking the gymnasium, building a full-size gymnasium, and then totally repurposing those places as music rooms, putting science in the basement where you have some relatively large spaces that you don't want kids to be in, all during the day, but you don't want to waste that space. And so we're really doing a lot of stuff at that school.
And one other question, you mentioned, of acquiring the U-Haul site as a parking and drop-off.
Yeah.
Is that just an idea, or have you actually, do you actually have any sense that it might be feasible?
No. That's just an idea. I mean, I could say, that you should acquire, whatever I want to say, but you as the town have to think about whether or not that's practical. I just looking at the problem of the old Lincoln School and thinking that one of the problems of the old Lincoln is what it does to traffic on Route 9. When you get people queuing and things like that, and how impractical that is. So then I start thinking, well, what are solutions? And someone suggested that you might actually redo that parking garage and sort of turn in off of there and then turn back onto the street. And I just didn't think that was enough space to really make that much of a difference. And so I look down the street and I say, hey, what about this big flat area here? And it's not the most attractive part of Route 9.
No.
So, are there any other questions up here? I have just one, and then I'd like to call a halt because I understand there is some food here. So, Pip, very early on in your presentation, you talked about the potential problems with supervision of a series of projects going on at the same time, I think. And my question to you is that something which the town is able to handle if it hires outside supervision, or is that the case no matter what we do?
Well, I think it's just harder to do. I mean, let's say Devotion is a project that's also moving ahead. To do 5 projects, well, and then you have the high school, 6 projects at a time than it is to do fewer, 2 or 3 or something like that. You have multiple contractors, you have multiple OPMs, which is the outside help that you're talking about, and you have to watch your OPMs also. You have multiple, if you have 6 projects, you have 6 roofers that you have to sort of wrestle with, and it's just a whole lot to pay attention to. And you have 6 schools that are disruptive, so you have 6 sets of parents who may be complaining about the construction dust or something like that. And it is a headache to handle all of that, regardless of how you do it. Now, it certainly can be done, but construction is not easy. Giving birth to a school is not the easiest thing in the world to do, and giving birth to 6 schools at once is also even harder. And so I just think it's something that needs to be considered. Outside help, which is, I'm assuming you're talking about a professional project management firm.
Yes.
To do that would certainly help that. You might have a construction manager who might be in charge of doing multiple schools, and so you have fewer general contractors to look out for. But it's just whatever it is. If it's 6 of them, it's harder than 3 of them.
Got it. Okay.
A question along those lines. If we did 3 or 4 at once, would those schools be able to be occupied? Because we only have 1 swing space. So do you anticipate that we could?
Well, so the idea, the notion when we started thinking about 6 schools, and then we said it was really only 4 schools, and 4 schools is really close to 3, so the difference isn't that much. But the idea of the 4-school option is that you're just adding like modular classrooms, and you could do that while the school is occupied. But the next option, 3, is because you're doing a more extensive renovation of the schools. Certainly the Lawrence School, where you're building on both sides, you'd want to move that out of there. Now, I can actually imagine that Driscoll, because it's all on one end, if you can live without having that gym, and you segment the site and you give access off of Washington Street for all your construction traffic, that you could do that while the school is occupied, because it seems very zonable in that way. And then Heath becomes, another question somewhere in between, because at least the option that we were showing, you're putting addition here and addition there. So that's harder to do than something in one area. But the answer would really depend on the particular school. Lawrence, definitely not. Driscoll, I bet you could do it while it was occupied. And then Heath, we'd really have to look at it more closely to determine whether it's practical.
Okay, I'd like to call a 15-minute rest stop here. Thank you very much, Pip.
Yeah. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. He turned it off.
Did in the sense that expanding the existing schools is not an easy option, but it's not.
Still be similar in size. If you put all the pre-K there, or but I think with the space we're talking about, building 712, make that school so you can either ceiling some of those spaces off or leaving them in the not handling the whole problem, because think about the size, you can handle, by building the 7 to 12, you can handle this much stuff. Right? You see at a 9 to 12, and putting in an early childhood center, one of several, you're handling much less things. The only thing about the 7 to 12 is that it solves your enrollment problem. It's a huge tool, but it solves the whole problem for the community. So then if you take all the pre-K and all the K, and you put it together, you get a huge project. And then if you try to divide that into 3 areas of the city or something like that, I imagine you have a hard time finding 3 areas where you can put projects that large. I don't know that because we did not have to study that. Yeah. Of course, thanks. Oh, well, that's good to hear. Now, is that a red t-shirt? I mean, is this a Stop Baldwin? Yeah, okay. I was just wondering. Yeah. Well, I was sort of thinking. Yeah. Oh, I see. That's great. Well, thank you. It's your place, yes. Thank you. Hi. Thank you.
My dad's an architect, he's done a lot of school projects. So
Valley Berkshire.
oh yeah.
Yes.
Very good question. Here's my crazy idea. You tell me how crazy it is. So I went to high school in New Hampshire, and we had for 9th graders we had school overcrowding in high school.
Yeah.
For 9th graders we had an annex, which was coincidentally about the same as Lincoln East High School. All the
talked about that both at Old Lincoln and at a site on Cypress. And people didn't want to buy the site. They didn't have to buy it. And they didn't want to sell it and all that stuff, but we also talked about it at Old Lincoln. So the conclusion was, in the end, that there were too many transitions. I'm just saying, so we did look at it, and it was set aside because of that, and people made the argument that the school, that was only 1 grade, people are always coming and going, and no one feels like they belong to the school, so we don't build a sense of community. That was certainly one of the things we looked at. So this, oh, no, I don't. whatever you're doing to nestle down into the hillside rather than overwhelming the neighbors. If you're doing on top of the hill, it'll be very tall, it'll be overcrowded in the backyard. I think if I were there, you have to be very careful when you're blasting. But endure the blasting for a while. Make sure you videotape the foundations, make sure there's no damage. And then in the end, for the next 100 years, you don't have a building overlooking your backyard. That's more necessary. I think that is in there because what's in there is like a new school. This is less than a new school. Now you're the opposition to old Lincoln, and I walked on that side. and I can imagine when it was moved out, like in the 90s or whatever, it was not a very good place. And it has never been like fully redone. So it has this certain sort of quality to it that age and value. Yeah, I think you would find that the classroom space would be very nice and start new research and things like that. And that if it's gymnasium, yeah. It all costs money. And you got a better school by rebuilding the new yeah. Good talking to you. Oh, hello. Oh, can you put the agenda up? What? That's not.
So here is our crazy compliment this week. Either put all the kids in a spaceship and just bring them back, and, like around graduation, or buy private derelict mansions and things that bring back where there are spaces still sitting out
There are private mansions. Are there derelict mansions in Brooklyn?
Yes, well, derelict enough that they sit on the market for several months. So
Oh, this way.
yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. When we were ready to come home, even though it was a town hall, it was sitting back there too. I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
So could we ask everybody to begin to sit down, please, so that we can continue? You'd ask everybody to sit down, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to ask you to sit down now so we can continue, please. Can we ask everybody to sit down now, please? Okay, thank you very much. Let's continue to sit down. Because of the variety of the presentation and the questions which came up, what we'd like to do right now with the committee is just to continue to pose some questions which can either be clarifying or any other type that they want, so that when we leave here, we will have an opportunity to think through, each of us, what we've heard, and that we will understand what we've heard, and then later we will be able to gather and begin to draw some conclusions. Michael.
We've had a fair amount of discussion about construction. If we went with the 3+ high school, the complications of construction, I'd like to ask the superintendent about another sort of timeline and complication. What does it take to put together a concept school, which is one of the things that's been alluded to here and we've heard before, and what kinds of work do you need to do 7 through 12, so that we get a sense of the sort of the things that have to go on behind the scene, regardless of construction, for those.
So let me start this by just reminding you all of what you already know, which is that we're dealing with a self-imposed, I'll say, deadline with MSBA of mid-September, which has to do with our ability to move forward with the devotion project. Some people have said, why can't we postpone that, move it out? Truth of the matter is you can, and you'll delay that project. So that's why we'll continue to call it sort of self-imposed. And I think that the problem with the two scenarios that you've asked about, Michael, is really that timeline and the amount of time that it would take to get the information that's necessary. I mean, we've been talking for some time now that a concept school. So, first of all, the conversation about a concept school in this district right now is very different than the conversation about concept schools in places where they generally start. The conversation there is not, in those places, is not as a strategy to alleviate enrollment issues. It's because we want to start a concept school around some issue. We have a concept, and we know from conversations it would attract students, and we have families who are interested in that idea. We don't know that. We have lots of people with lots of opinions on it, but we haven't surveyed them or figured out in any kind of organized way whether there would actually be some demand for a concept school, period, and then if there were, what that concept might be. So, you know, I've suggested that it would involve some work with a consultant around asking those questions and gathering that information, and that takes X period of time, which I know goes beyond mid-September. So that's that issue. The 7 through 12, I mean, again, the advantage that was posed here is that it's one transition. I mean, we've looked at those kinds of issues. It's one transition. It provides us with room for our pre-Ks. It's one solution, and it's large. The issue is really around looking at the programmatic aspects of that and what they look like. And I think I've said this when we've talked about high schools before, that you have an opportunity to do certain things within those high schools programmatically. We'd want to talk about those. The main issue we would spend most time on here is what to do with 7th, 8th, and quite frankly, I'll include 9th graders in a high school environment. What's the right type of structure? What's the right type of grouping? And where you have an opportunity to build for that, you'd want to have those conversations about program, because quite frankly, you know, while there's lots of research, I think I've said this to you before, on transitions, there isn't research that says K-8 terrific, 7 through 12 bad. It's just that there are certain things that you're going to need to do programming well in those places, and we'd have to explore that more before we'd be able to programmatically sign on to that kind of idea.
Okay. But that's not, because of the time that we have available to build that space, that's not, it doesn't sound like that, as opposed to a concept school, is a show-stopping problem in terms of you have to do a design and do the programming and so forth, but it's something that over a couple of years could be done or could evolve.
Oh, sure. They're
I do have, can I interrupt just for a second? Because it seems to me what I thought was going to be part of the problem is if we talk about doing additions, and I'm actually perhaps going to ask Catherine to weigh in here, the grade levels actually determine substantially some of the specialized spaces. If there are 7th and 8th graders, there are science labs and particular specialized classrooms. It's not clear to me those exist for a 6th grade. I can imagine they'd be desirable, but I don't know if that's part of the, I'm sort of going by MSBA standards.
So you're talking about the issue with your remaining K-8 buildings and what you built versus what you need. Sure,
exactly.
It's an issue.
Yeah.
It's an issue. And, yeah.
All right, so I think what I'm really asking, or maybe stating, I mean, to me, one of the issues would be what is special about 7th and 8th grade classroom space and or organization, teaching the way that the teaching certification is done, or any of those kinds of things that would be a significant, I'm being careful with my language.
No, you're fine.
Issue.
So the only issue, so the only part of that I'll try to tear apart a little bit is the issue of the licensure that you mentioned. And I know I've answered this question for Mr. Morris before. Quite frankly, when we were talking about an 8th grade school, I added the licensure issue as one of the concerns. But that's because you were moving off people who were teaching 8th grade and you were left with, and so a lot of people now still teach both of those or those and 6th grade. And so you have some licensure issues there. When you have 7th and 8th graders together, no matter where they are, you don't have those licensure issues. The issue is really more about programmatic and do you want 7th and 8th graders in a high school. There are 7 to 12 buildings. They exist. I'm not sure anybody's made, again, I'd have to spend a lot more time on this. Our staff would have to spend a lot more time on this. I'm not sure many people have said programmatically we believe that a 7 through 12 building is to the academic and social advantage of our 7th and 8th graders. Therefore, we're going to construct it. As I said earlier, they've managed to find ways to make it work by the way they group students. But I'm not sure they set out, again, for programmatic reasons to create that building. Might find examples where they have. I'm doubting it.
A question for Pip or Stephanie. The Lincoln site, the old Lincoln site on the west side between the current building and the U-Haul property is currently a big rock outcropping.
Granite ledge.
So did your estimates include the necessity of dealing with that, and can you describe what could be some of the strategies for dealing with that kind of ledge, and what kind of a disruption to the neighborhood would there be?
If you were to pursue a solution like we're showing at Old Lincoln, we would suggest that you should deal with that granite ledge, because part of the removal of it, because that's what we're doing, we're sort of removing a lot of it in order to continue this school to the west, puts, classroom space, daylighting, things like that at the ground level and then at the second level. It also lowers the bulk of the building, so it minimizes the impact on the houses that face onto Walnut Street. If you were building something that was sort of stepping up the hill or something like that, it would be a much more significant impact. The construction impact would be, let's say, significant because you have to do blasting, but it would be limited in duration. It would go on for a while. You would videotape the houses, the foundations, the plaster work to ensure that they're not damaged. Blasting actually particularly is less noisy than many other types of construction like pile driving and things like that. And so our advice would be, if you go in a direction like that, take it on. We did attempt to capture the cost of that in the estimates. And I have to say about all these estimates, because there's no detailed drawings or anything, they're concept estimates, which means they're great for comparing one option to another, but something that I show as being $148,374,000, don't kid yourself. In the end, it's not going to be exactly that. But we did try to capture that scope in what we were looking at. There may have been another part of your question. Is that?
No, I think.
Yes, Catherine.
Pip, just in terms of the 3 elementary schools that you showed tonight, it seems that there are some significant good things that can come, because one of the things we look at when we look at the school stock in Brookline anyway, generally, is you've got the Runkle, which is relatively new. The Heath just had an addition, but the Lawrence has not had an addition or a renovation in 20 years, or 15, 10? 2005?
It's Driscoll.
Okay, 10 years old.
It's Driscoll, right?
Driscoll, okay. So Driscoll's been sort of lacking. I'm just wondering, and so in terms of improving the quality of life, as Rebecca pointed out, you're going to be adding, a huge infusion of kids to these existing elementary schools, but is there also an improvement to their quality of life and education because you're adding other things like technology that may not be there, because with the exception of Runkle and Heath, they're all before 2005, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the presumption is that with the 3-school option as opposed to the 4-school option, when you're doing a thorough renovation, you're bringing in technology through the school. But if you're doing one of the limited options where you're adding a certain number of classrooms on, you can decide, well, how much you're going to get into renovating the rest of the school, bringing in technology and things like that. You might decide not to. You might decide, hey, let's do it. But with these other options where you're expanding library, cafeteria, putting in science, putting in art, putting in music and things like that, I'm also assuming that you'd be putting in technology. I do think that the quality of education in those schools, or at least the facility to provide the quality of education, would be better, because they would be completely modern school buildings once they were completed, as opposed to the same old school building with 4 classrooms added onto it, or 6 classrooms, or whatever it would be.
But that sounds like a greater renovation throughout the school, which means we're vacating them.
Well, some things you could do like the Driscoll example. Well, let's take Lawrence, for example, to begin with. Because you're doing such an intimate renovation of Lawrence in this scheme that we came up with, you are vacating it. So you're going to go through the building. The space that's kindergarten is becoming science. The space that's cafeteria at the moment is becoming classroom. So you're going to be bringing technology into those classrooms, and why not do the other 3 in the row there and things like that. With Driscoll, again, you have more choice is what you do, because you're only adding on to the end, and you could say, well, let's not do anything to upgrade the rest of it. But also, you could do summer projects with, for things like technology, and you can get that done easily enough in the summertime. So it doesn't imply that you really have to vacate the building.
More questions?
Ms. Stone?
So, Pip and Stephanie, I realize that mostly what we're asking you to do is speculate wildly on our behalf, so thank you for stepping into that. I was curious, along those lines of speculating wildly, whether you did any thinking about mixing and matching some of these things, whether there are economies for us, maybe even ways around some of the downsides of some of these by doing one from column A, two from column B. Is there a reason why we couldn't expand at some, do modulars at some? Would we be able to, is there a mix and match that gets us where we need to go?
There certainly would be a mix and match approach. If you asked, did we really spend any time with that? No. The only way we got through so many different things in really a very short period of time is by sort of systematizing it. And so, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do the 6-school option. Oh, no, that's a 4-school option. We're going to do a 3-school option. We're going to do a 1-school option. Like I said earlier, we didn't even look at a 2-school option. It just wasn't one of the things that we were on our list, so we didn't look at it. You could add, as people might be suggesting, you could add a few classrooms at Heath and a much more significant addition at Driscoll. You could decide that Lawrence wants to make use of the old Lincoln again as swing space, and in order to become this thoroughly modern, larger elementary school, and at the same time doing something else smaller somewhere else. Or you could do the same thing with Driscoll. I think that you could certainly mix and match, but we haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about the various mixes and matches that there would be.
Thanks.
Is there a point at which a solution that involves a school like Lawrence involves demolishing and starting over again rather than adding additions? Is there an efficiency that can be gained, and have you explored that?
Well, yes, and that's a very good question. When you're doing a study for, these are very preliminary studies that we're doing. So if you were to engage in a project with an architect to redo, I'll say the Lawrence School, just because it's an excellent example of getting to a point where you might think, should we rebuild it? The first thing you would do is you do a feasibility study, with the MSBA as your partner on that. And you would look at various options. And one of those options would be renovations and additions. Another option would be new construction. You look at the cost and the other implications of that. And you can make that decision based on, on cost and practicality and also the attachment to the old building. A project like Driscoll, where you're adding on one wing, it's kind of obvious to me that that wouldn't be a tear down and start over again, because you have an adequate school that you're just adding a concise element to. And every project goes through a process of determining which is the right option. And I actually find that frequently projects that we're involved in wind up with different solutions than what we expected or what we were hired to do. I mentioned the Sprague School in Wellesley, where we were hired to demolish a little schoolhouse because it was so small and out of date that people couldn't imagine that it would be used in a modern school facility. And we figured out a way of saving it and using it as the sort of the front piece of this new school facility. We were hired other places to renovate buildings, and then concluded that it really wasn't practical for various reasons as we got into it. And the direction that was gone was to take the building down and rebuild it. So it really, you can't come up with an overall conclusion. It's just you have to look closely at each one to determine what the best solution is. And it can depend on dollars and cents. It can depend on logistics. It can depend on historical issues, things like that.
I want to push a little bit harder on Lawrence and starting from scratch there. I mean, did you go there? Did you think about that as a solution? And at what point do we decide to go deeper into that question?
So I think you would go deeper from a cost point of view. Stephanie is probably smiling because I spend a lot of my time at the office trying to save old buildings, and the Lawrence building, it looks nice sitting on the street, and so my reaction there is, oh no, I want to figure out how to make this. I mean, if you were doing a Lawrence project, how to make this a larger, more modern facility, but I want to keep that look on the street. And as Stephanie knows, I will struggle and struggle and struggle, and sometimes I've lost out in the battle because it frequently comes down to the dollars and cents. And if we show that it's more practical to build a new, more economical to build a new building, that frequently that'll be what the town wants to do. In some cases, it's a matter of height, like a 4-story elementary school, which Lawrence is. I've certainly worked for communities who that was the deal breaker for them. They just didn't want an elementary school to be 4 stories tall, and we replaced it with a new 2-story building. They had more site than you have, so I don't think that's an option at Lawrence. But that's the kind of thing that can figure into the decision. And so as to whether you're completely replacing a Lawrence school, there might be advantages to that. My initial reaction is that in general the scheme we came up with is a pretty dense, efficient scheme, and that a new building might be just as dense and efficient, but it wouldn't be more dense and efficient.
So that's my real question. Right?
Yeah. So you wouldn't be saving in that way. And the reason why I think the reason why I kept saying, this is a pretty neat solution, is because I think it's a pretty tight, efficient solution. I think we figured out what to do with the windowless spaces so that kids weren't in them a long period of time. When I say windowless, they're actually not windowless. They're looking out onto courtyards, but we managed to put science and music in those spaces, whereas we moved the kindergartners out of their spaces that would have limited views into spaces that had great views and access to the ground. So it was a solution that, in that sort of diagrammatic way, seemed like a really wonderful solution to that particular school. And so that's why my initial reaction to, if you were just saying, well, should we replace Lawrence, I would say, well, let's look at it. Let's see what the costs are. But I don't see a great improvement by replacing it. In fact, I see some losses.
All right. Now apply that same question to Pierce now.
I talked to somebody here who was from MIT, and Pierce was designed by an architect from MIT. It's considered, I was going to say it was considered, I may say it is considered a bit of an architectural landmark, but everybody knows it's had lots of problems, like it's on its second facade. Inside it has that open classroom configuration that most schools have moved away from. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of Pierce. I haven't talked with how happy people in Pierce are with the configuration there, except I happen to know a couple of Pierce parents who are just recent Pierce parents. They moved from Jamaica Plain when their child became of school age, and that's the reason why you're having this problem. And they like the Pierce school very much. But Pierce is a very peculiar school. If we were studying it to see whether that could be renovated or built new, I see that would maybe be more problematic in the way I look at it than Lawrence. and it really depends on what kind of a school do you see in the end. Are you preserving the open classroom configuration, and is there a way, or if not, is there a way to divide that up into?
Assuming we're not preserving the open classroom, is there an efficiency to be gained by starting afresh at Pierce from what's
So,
there now?
speaking from an almost total lack of real full understanding of whether my answer is correct or not, I would think that there would be an efficiency that could be built, that could be found there. Pierce zigs and zags, and and it could be built in a more sort of
Orthogonal.
multi-story way that could get more
Rectangular.
space in that space that's there, and maybe result in some additional outdoor play space. I mean, I don't want to criticize the school, because walking around it, it's a beautiful, it's an architect's wonderful vision from whenever it was, from the 80s or whatever. 60s. From the 60s.
So, I'm sorry.
But yeah, I could see some possibilities there that, and you'll notice that the way I talk about that is very different than the way I talk about Lawrence.
So I understand Michael has a question, I have a question, anybody else have a question? And Neil has a question, and then I think we want to go on because we have another issue.
Task.
Yeah, another task. So, Michael.
We've talked about the cost factors, and we talked about the programmatic elements and so forth, and the difficulties of doing renovations on 3 schools all at one time, plus doing something in the high school, perhaps at a little bit later date and so forth. One of the constraints we're under is that we need to have space for 600 children by September 2017. That's our job, and we knew getting started that 4 years was sort of the minimum time to get all of this done. If you look at the options that you have, the 3+ high school, the 1+ high school, and the new high school with a 7 to 12 configuration, is there any one of those that is a faster track, any one of those that is a significantly slower track from a design and construction perspective?
Well, I think one of the ones, and there are going to be very different answers here. One of the ones that's a faster track is if you're adding a cluster of classrooms at as many schools as you can. And that's because the amount of renovation that you're doing, and particularly if you're bringing modulars onto the site, that moves pretty quickly in terms of the on-site construction time. And if you're not doing, involved renovations inside of the school, that could go quickly.
But that's the 4+.
That's the 4+, yes. Yes, the 3+ would be, I would think, relatively slow, because I think you'd have a hard time, this is just me, taking on all 3 projects at the same time. And therefore, you'd only get one project done, and then another project done, and then another project done. Or you get 2 projects done, and the third one would come later, or something like that. And so you would get extra capacity at some of the schools, but not at all of the schools by the time that you need them. The other one that gets you going quickly is really the 7-12, because you build one big school and you'd be done. Now, it is possible. I keep sort of warning against trying to do 3 schools all at once, and I should probably stop doing that, because it's been done, it can be done, and that would indeed bring those 3 schools online. Whereas if you do them school after school, like Cambridge and Newton are doing, it would take a long time to get them online. And Cambridge and Newton are probably dealing with different enrollment profiles than you are.
And just to be clear, we were doing Runkle and Heath simultaneously. That was 2 going on.
I just want to say to this, the problem is it's not 3 schools. The problem is it's 3 schools
Plus high school.
and devotion, and devotion, and whatever solution which falls in the same time frame that we need to complete at the high school.
Yes, that's true.
So it seems to me minimally it's 4 schools,
Well,
plus the high school.
and then
Sounds like
there's,
5 to me.
and then
Well,
there's,
devotion, I mean, yeah, I was saying devotion plus 3 plus the high school. That's 5.
That's 5.
Yeah.
plus some minor work at Old Lincoln.
To make it
a
a swing
up to code
space,
for
yeah.
swing space.
So,
Although the high school, excuse me, Michael, the high school deadline is a little further out.
right.
It may be 1 year, maybe.
Okay,
In a best-case scenario, 1 year out.
okay.
And a new school, new K through 8 is the one that you haven't addressed. That presumably is a relatively quick process. You don't have to clear a building out. You've got a place to put it, even though nobody likes either one of the places to put it.
Yeah, but you could put it there, and in the amount of time it takes to go through you have to do the MSBA feasibility study. First, you have to submit your statement of interest, and then that has to matriculate to the top, and then you have to go through the feasibility study, and then design, development, and construction documents. So it takes a while with all of these, because of the step of going through the MSBA. You can't start
We understand the 4-year
tomorrow.
minimum,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a sense of whether one of them goes way beyond that, or one of them is right at that.
No, and I think when I say some go way beyond, it's the ones that are multiple school projects if you decide to do them sequentially. Yes.
Okay.
Neil?
Let me come back to Lawrence and an issue that's come up to us, and I don't know if it's within our charge, but I'll ask it anyway. The current project with modulars, if we're heading towards, if in the end we decide a 3+ high school solution is the way to go, how does doing the modulars at Lawrence affect that, or does it affect that?
Can I answer that? I think you would simply move the modulars when
Exactly.
when the time came to do the construction. If you weren't doing that construction at Lawrence for 3 years and the modulars are going in, when are the modulars going in? Very soon.
Say December.
You would move them to another location. And people say, oh, but they have brick on them and things like that, so it's a little bit more hard to move than something that doesn't have brick, but still, they are modulars, they're meant to be moved, and it might, I don't know, I know nothing about this modular project. Some of the brick modulars are designed to travel, and some are not, and I have no idea what the particular modulars are doing in this particular case. But modulars are designed to travel.
Along those lines, and I hate to raise it, but I've been asked by a couple people whether it makes any sense to consider whether Devo should be part of a larger plan and that should be reconsidered as part of all of what we're doing. The current Devo, the current plan to expand Devo.
Just be a little clearer about what the question?
I've been asked by a couple people, should we be looking at, as part of the overall solution, is what we're doing at Devo, or planning to do at Devo, should that be held? Should it be held for pending what we're doing?
Should it be bigger?
Should it be bigger? Should it be different? And I was like, good question.
It's been an assumption all along that it would be going forward. For it to be held, it seems to me, I don't know. Dr. Lapini, do you want to comment about this?
I certainly think that the solution, the bigger solution, has to be created so that we know exactly what it is that we're doing there. We've had, we'll open this year with 5 sections of kindergarten. That means a building that I'm reminded often was not even built for 4 sections per grade level, now has 5, 6, and 5 in its 3 youngest grades. And so clearly there's a need for at least the solution of the 4.5 that we've talked about per grade level, if not 5. But I think and I think the architects would agree that whatever we ultimately propose there in terms of the conversation with MSBA, it's really going to come out of this conversation. So I think that's partially answered. I think it has to come out of this. I would just hope that we are able to stay on that time frame.
So that means we have the ability still to expand.
I think
the
we have
Devo concept?
I believe, I'm looking at Mr. Rowe, but I believe we have the ability to look at what we're doing at Devotion in light of this overall conversation. In fact, I think they would demand it.
I think they have demanded it.
So maybe I'll just ask one last question to Dr. Lupini and go back to the concept school. And you described the research that would have to be done to find out even what the community is really interested in. The other thing that occurs to me that's complicated about that, and I'm not sure how complicated it is that when we draw students, we'd have to draw students from each school in the numbers that we have to make room in each school, and how do we do that and also create the diversity or meet the diversity objective that we have?
So I have no idea how you do that.
Okay.
I will say that this, for Mr. Rowe's entertainment, I mean, at one point in the conversation about concepts, we've talked about grade levels other than K through 8. Mm-hmm. And that got us to this idea that, you know, if you don't get students out of the schools in the right numbers from each school, then you must reconfigure those remaining schools to do so. So, for example,
right.
just to take this to the extreme, we talked about an idea of a concept that was 6, 7, 8, right? Only those grades. And we talked about then reconfiguring the remaining K to 8s, some of them as K to 8s and some of them as K to 5s. That's the only way to drive the numbers in the way you need them to fall.
Right.
Right? That's why we create buffer zones. That's why we enlarge buffer zones, because you're looking for more control over enrollment in each school. This is no different. This discussion is no different.
Got it.
It's just much more onerous kinds of maneuvers necessary to do it. The diversity issue, I think for most schools that draw from across town, I speak from a little bit of experience. My wife teaches at Saltonstall, one of the elementary schools that's an application school in Salem. It's a very difficult thing, and generally speaking, they don't meet the profile of the city or town.
I know we were trying to draw to a close, but I realize there's one thing we have heard a little bit about and we haven't really discussed, and at least maybe Dr. Lupini, you'd just give us some general overview of early education centers and the impact that would have. In other words, if there were no kindergarten classrooms in K through 8s, what happens?
So way back when, in this conversation, we talked about if we were going to have to move our pre-Ks out of our buildings, we'd try to sort of establish them in at least 3 locations in town. And we've been able to do some pieces of that, not as much as we set out to do. There were some discussions we were having at the time that fell through. Now you're asking me to not only take those 287-ish pre-K students and do that, but to take 600 kindergarten students and do that. And that's a lot of classrooms in, let's say, the same configuration, 3 different locations in town. It seems to me that would be us going through this same kind of conversation about how do we locate 10 in this part of town, or 5 in this part of town, or 10 more here. Those are difficult conversations. It means securing multiple sites, anywhere between 3 and, I guess if you were trying to locate 1 near every school, 8. That it seems to me become very difficult. And I'll just remind you, I know this isn't what you asked, but if you talk about grouping those students all in one place, I think it surprises people when I say you're talking about 900 students. So we're talking about a total of 900 students and finding places for them. That's a pretty difficult undertaking, even in sort of what you've been engaged in. I think that adds to the complexity quite a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'd like to hear from Ms. Stone, who has been working on the,
I'm sorry,
and-
Mr.
and-
Can I just
Sorry.
say one other thing
Yeah.
before?
Go ahead.
So this goes back way back to the the first question I was asked, and that is, I spoke to the 7 through 12 and the new building. What I did not say is that your present high school is not configured in any way to address the needs of 7th, 8th graders at the very least, right? And so I think an assumption that there might have to be some expenditure there in terms of the programmatic model would be a good one.
Right.
And that wasn't included in any estimates that you saw.
Right, and just to be clear, part of what I'm interested in, and maybe we're going to have to ask this or get, let's say, a slightly separate analysis, is if we removed kindergarten classrooms from all the elementary schools, those are somewhat specialized spaces. They have
Yes.
more square feet than
Yes.
a sixth grade classroom, for example. And it has its own impact, which is kind of like taking out 7th and 8th, where there are science rooms and other specialized classrooms. And so all of those things have a level of detail that we would really need to understand.
Yes, as was pointed out in the presentation, and some of our kindergarten rooms in our buildings actually meet those specifications. Not all of them do.
Right.
Some of them are rooms that we've cannibalized from other purposes and turned them into kindergarten rooms, even though they don't have that same square footage right now.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate all the effort that the architects have put into putting together the presentation, and particularly being willing to answer our questions, some of which I do not think were part of the study. So we appreciate that very much. I think we all feel like we have a lot more information, and clearly we're going to need some time to process it. But thank you.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. All right, this is the practical part of it.
Right, so Ms. Stone has worked on the organizational structure of our report and has some interesting ideas which we wanted to share with you all because it has an impact on how we're going to write what we write. Ms. Stone.
So, of course, being one of the people, I don't even know whether I was the only person who wasn't here for the last meeting, I got volunteered in my absence to pull this report together from all of the pieces that were assigned to all of you who had the good sense to show up for the meeting. In looking through the draft of the, I guess, the fourth iteration of the outline that we were working with a week or so ago, I noticed a number of things that I thought could be strengthened in terms of what we were putting in that speak to a lot of the conversation we've had, that speak to some of the questions that have repeatedly come up to us from the public, and that I think the final report needs to address. And finally, just simple organizational things about which sections come where. So in front of you, you have 3 pages which should look very familiar. I took out some of the incredible detail that was in one of the drafts I looked at, just to make it less bulky to look at. But the challenge and the opportunity, you'll see, has always been our first section after the executive summary. This is really, I think, where we lay out the whole thing. The challenge, obviously the growing student population, the space limits, along with those, and the budget, both to the operating budget, to address the growing student population, but also to address the space needs. Yes, thank you. That was before in the, and again, this is, I'm sorry, Mel, I'm doing this to you because your name is on this section, so I just added to your, I've added to your duties here. But in terms of just going through the projections, obviously the MGT reports that we started with, all of the presentations we've heard from the public schools, Peter Rowe's presentations, I do think one of the main things that I think that section has to address, which we've been dealing with the whole time, is why it's different this time. There are those who, I think a lot of people on this committee feel like we understand why it's different this time, but there's certainly not a general understanding of why that is, and I think we need to go over that. The opportunity brings into this report, I think, some of the sense that lost in our dedication to solving the problem was a sense that there is, in fact, opportunity here. There is opportunity to dream big for Brookline, as some of the folks in the community have done, some of the folks on the committee have done, and I don't think we should write this report without giving due space to the idea of dreaming big. And there are a number of ideas that we've been kicking around that involve that kind of dreaming, and where could we go if we had the will and we had the money to do it. And so I think it's important to add in there. And then finally, just explaining what the role of this committee was, which is all pretty much straightforward and was in the outline before. The objectives and core principles of space expansion, again, just elaborates on what was there before in the outline. But it also gives us an opportunity to define certain things. We use shorthand. We talk about educational excellence. On the school committee for years, we used to refer very blithely to preserving Brookline's reputation until somebody on the committee pointed out that we don't actually know whether we've earned that reputation. We just have the reputation. And so one of the things we need to explain when we talk about educational excellence is what the heck do we mean by educational excellence? And so meeting the stuff that we've been using with the CBA process, I think, really speaks to that, and it can go in here. Meeting or exceeding current educational program scope, low student-to-teacher ratios, recruiting and retaining the highest quality teachers, et cetera. And we move on from there. So this is all the stuff we've been using in CBA. Again, it just will lay out for people what the core principles were that we were applying in terms of how we judged each proposal in front of us. The wonderful presentation that Michael's already done on the financial considerations is going to get put in. I don't think I touched that section, Michael. It's right there, an essential. I did think that going through the various options that have been considered, whether or not they are still being considered, was important to delineate that and to do that before we talked about where we ended up in terms of looking more fully, which options did we look more fully at relative to all of the ones that have come onto the table and why. And then finally, off of this presentation tonight, we've been waiting for a lot of the data that we now have, the review of the existing facilities, the potential of new building sites, and that section would come after we've looked at the options.
Can I ask a question of Pip? Some of the detail that went behind some of those, some of the assessments of the sites, will that be available to us? Because that'll help us in writing what we need to write in terms of the assessing the sites.
Yes, this is sort of focused on this presentation.
Right.
And we would do the written report, which would have all of that backup and things like that in there.
Actually, I'd love to have all of the onion layers for to do the
financial.
to put that data into the financial part of it, rather than just a PDF, so that I don't have to type it all back in myself.
Oh, yeah, that
So if
makes
you could
sense.
send that to.
Like, the assessment of the old link, of the new Lincoln, why it's not buildable, and, Pierce, all that stuff, because that'll help us write our thing.
Yes, and I think I was telling, Rebecca earlier, that stuff's not written yet, but, so we have notes and things like that. Okay. And our idea, it was after this presentation, we would start to compile that actual report and get those pieces together.
Yeah, good question.
Because we're on the hook.
Well, what is what works well for you? I mean,
Tomorrow, the next day.
Like 2 weeks or something like that?
But I think Pip was very generous in saying that if we wanted, we could also call him and just get some of that information as if our timelines interfere with yours, you guys do have other work to do.
And you have my card.
And,
We
yeah.
were going to talk about things, yes.
Well, I don't have a lot of time during business hours in the next few days.
Right. To be clear, our hope was to be able to have recommendations ready to hand over to the school committee by the 16th of August, which means we'd need your information
Really
well
fast.
enough ahead of that to incorporate it into whatever our report says.
You don't have to commit right now, Pip. It's
Okay, maybe, Rebecca, you and I should try to talk tomorrow or something like that, and we can figure out what we can do.
Okay.
Okay?
I mean, it's I don't know, we'll work when we're drafting. It's possible that we can draft, leave big blanks, and then
we can
and try
insert
to get the
insert
information where the
documents.
blanks are from you. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we'll make it work.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So just finally, so we've got the review of the existing facilities. We've now taken care of that section. The assessment of the whole CBA approach and outcomes process would then be explained so that, again, we're being very transparent about how we did our due diligence on actually assessing the various final options that we came up with, and then finally, obviously, the recommendations to the school committee. There's lots of room for appendices. I put a few things down here that might go into appendices. Obviously, there are other things. But just sort of your general sense, whether or not, is there anything that you all were thinking about that's missing from in here? Is it too much? Is it the right organization? Just
Where do
any
the district studies that we've done, where do they go?
That was, I think that's review of existing facilities, right? Oh, no, wait a minute. Sorry, no. Where did it go? It was here. Under number 5, right.
It's 5, options for expansion.
Well, for example, for fall, that talks
Yeah.
Right.
So, in options for expansion, what we saw tonight should be in there too.
Sure.
The 4+ high school, 3+ high school.
Right.
Right. I will tell you, we've probably got to put together a very complete list of all of the, let's say, named options, I guess is what I'm going to call them. We didn't analyze every one of them, but I think we at least ought to have, maybe it's an appendix, maybe it's, the list is is part of an appendix.
There's a document that was
Yeah, we
in the
started to
circulated
sort
draft.
of work on
Yeah.
that. It's an early draft, and it's certainly not complete.
Right.
And
but
under number
good
6,
stuff.
we have
So,
options selected.
excuse me,
Sorry.
maybe one of my requests would be for people to contribute lists or contribute to the list so that we get it a complete one.
But we have, right now, it's under number 6, it would be looking at the new K-8 at Amory, the K-8 or renovated and expanded Old Lincoln. Those are in here. Following, so there's options for school expansion, which is more or less an exhaustive list of what we thought about, and then they're the ones we looked at more closely following.
But I think in the more close list should be 3+ high school, 4+ high school.
Yes, and that's here. Under small Roman numeral 3, it's distributed expansion of K-8s will have, and that's based on the HMFH work. You see that?
What we've been doing up to now is focused on individual sites. This is really pulled together in an overview fashion. It doesn't really matter whether it's Amory, Baldwin, Old Lincoln, or Woburn, where this is what a K-8 implies.
Right.
And I think that's the best way to get into the discussion. And then at some point, we always have to say, is it Amory, Baldwin, Old Lincoln, or Woburn, or something else? Additions to the existing school. So the wrapper of this page of the 4+ high school, 3+ high school, 1+ high school, new high school, that's it's a great wrapper to start with.
Okay, we also don't have, it may have fallen off when I was redoing the outline. There is no name associated with the number 6.
Oh, I think Alan and I were doing 5 and 6. They were sort of.
Yeah.
You were doing 5 and 6,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
Okay,
We did that.
Right.
We're working on that together.
okay, great.
I'm glad you are.
Would you like to join us?
I won't be around. I like that for an excuse.
Duck. Hi.
So,
Is there
in,
anything?
Do we say anything about our interim, which is obviously looking an awful lot like Old Lincoln? Do we say anything about that?
If we look at our, is we say
Our
anything?
interim solution, what are we doing before we get any of these done? 2014?
It wasn't in the original outline that I was working with. That's a good question.
Is that part of our charge?
I'll probably address
Well, we-
some of the background in my slide.
Whether it is or
The
not.
charge talks about temporarily using Old Lincoln
Right.
as transitional, a transitional site. But since we hadn't figured out what we were transitioning to,
Unless it's the permanent site.
Right, which is a
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
And if if it's a transitional site, we need to know who's there. And if it's a permanent site, we need to know who's somewhere else.
It's a good.
Even if we don't know the answers, we
I think,
probably ought to put something in there about that.
I think that has to go into, as part of the challenges. I think, Mel, you're right. That's,
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question, Phil. Are you saying what's the swing space or some temporary space going forward and as we go forward with the plan?
Yeah.
How can we answer that until we know what the plan is?
yeah,
But we
I
have to
think.
at least identify that this needs to be addressed. I mean, even if we
Well,
don't-
you can identify as need for swing space. I think that's a fair thing to say, for sure. What we heard from the report tonight was that there were some places where you wouldn't have to remove kids, and some models where you do have to remove them, so.
Yes, but we need to provide for an additional 600 children by 2017, but it isn't like the school enrollment stays flat until 2017.
Right.
It goes like that.
Right.
There's a gradual buildup, and so, if we don't have Old Lincoln as swing space in the meantime, then what do we do with those kids?
probably Old Lincoln plus maybe 4 modulars that we can
Yeah,
move around.
modulars and,
Right.
big tents,
Well, maybe talk about transition.
So
And if
under,
it were-
I think under the discussion of options for school expansion, it needs
Yeah.
to be noted as the, the conundrum of the use of Old Lincoln and addressing the.
yeah, you can't use it for two
Right.
things
Right,
at once.
exactly,
Right.
right.
And even if we don't know the complete answer, we need to make sure that that gets addressed.
That we acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back and make sure I am clear. Neil, you asked a question about where we would put redistricting, and I think in the the options that were more completely reviewed would be where that belongs, right? I mean, because
Yeah, yeah, 'cause
that's
that's
where,
one
that's how
aspect.
we were measuring the impact.
Right.
Right. Okay.
If you want me to help write that.
Oh, I think you better write the whole thing, thank you very much. No help, you don't get any help. You deliver it. Yeah, I know, but guess what? It's going to have a special expert opinion provided from your subcommittee.
I shouldn't have opened my mouth.
To that end, I hate to open my mouth for you. Is it worth taking a look at what the 3+ or modified 3+ redistricting looks
Yes. And Ken and Rebecca get.
Rebecca and
Yeah.
I are
like? Oh, you
doing
guys are
that
gonna do
Thursday
that. Sorry.
afternoon.
Yeah, the 2.5.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. We definitely want redistricting
And
impacts.
actually, one thing you ought to think about is doing Heath, Driscoll, Lawrence as presented, and then doing say a 2.5, where maybe you put a couple of classrooms on Heath and do a bigger Driscoll.
The one thing that the wrapper that we've got doesn't wrap around is devotion, and that comes into play if we're talking about shifting some classroom addition, adding more to devotion, taking some away from what he's suggesting at Heath. We have to include that discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
as well.
I think, I was going to take this up with Rebecca, but I think as much as that three, I'd like to do maximize devotion, Driscoll, Heath as another alternative.
Well, that's to say, it's devotion's going to go ahead anyway, but you want to increase
So you
it.
can bump up Driscoll as well, yeah.
Bump up devotion, bump up Driscoll, modular at Heath. I mean, I think that's something that we should look at.
Yeah.
Not Lawrence.
What's that?
Not Lawrence.
Well, Lawrence is in the mix as well.
Well, I think given that Lawrence is already modular, I don't know how much more you can do practically at Lawrence. That's just my impression.
That major rebuilding.
Yeah. I mean, that's another look too. I mean,
But in terms of sequencing, it seems to me what we've been hearing is we might need to have modulars at Lawrence to get us through a transition period until such time as it would be through the pipeline for a major renovation expansion. So it's the short-term solution, not the long-term
would be the
solution.
end game, would be Lawrence.
Right, that's kind of the way the plan seems to be rolling out.
And I was very encouraged to hear Pip say that because they're modular construction, you could actually incorporate them into.
We could move them over to Heath.
Or we could move them over to the other side of Lawrence. I mean, if Lawrence does that, they can be used in even the expansion design that he was talking about. At least that's what I heard him say, I think.
I don't know if I believe it.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Well,
about,
I don't know what
break
Philip
the string
says.
on something, it's kind of
But my understanding is the modular, it's prefab,
Right.
but it's up to construction standards that would be same
Oh,
for new
sure,
construction,
But
so.
it's just but once you put a facade on it, it becomes it's a semi-permanent.
Oh, I see what you're
Well,
saying.
yeah, and
You're saying that removing the facade is actually not that big a deal?
Oh, it's not, no.
but it's
reasonable.
prefab to a
Yeah.
spec,
That it's
to a
anyway.
size.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
But it's not a matter of loading it onto a forklift and shuffling it across the school.
See, I'm building a modular house, and I can't imagine it being moved anywhere.
Right.
I think it's done in a different fashion. The way it's
Okay.
being done as compared to modular
That's why
classroom.
MSBA never reimbursed them, because our impression was you could move them from place to place.
You might shift them from one school to another
Part of
or
the pitch
something.
was
Yeah,
that,
right.
you can move these from place to place. We said, well, the state shouldn't be paying for the permanent cost of moving something from place to place temporarily, so.
Okay, so we need to find out a little more about that as a,
So if I could ask a timing question, Ms. Doan. My recollection is that you and I chatted just briefly about the people who have been assigned a section, getting a rough draft of that section to you, and then having an interactive discussion with Lisa and yourself, so that you can then
And try to weave them together and work with people on if there are holes. I mean, we're essentially just going to be editors and say, there's something missing here, we need to get that, and we'll work with all of the different section drafters and then try to pull together what on the school committee anyway we would talk about is a document that's ready for a first reading, which is something that can be brought to the full committee for consideration.
well, if
Yeah.
that's what you're saying, it sounds to me like we need to have as many contributions in draft form available let's say, by Friday of this week in order for us to discuss them on Monday, the 5th.
That's really what I was driving at.
I knew that's what you were trying to do.
Oh, you've gotten to know me too well.
If we're going to be discussing them on Monday, and that means that the committee has to have something in front of it by, Sunday. Then there is no way in the world people can have till Friday to get those first drafts to us.
That's probably true.
Well, I think,
So, but I think some work has been done already, but not yours,
well,
because you couldn't
I
really.
think Phil and I have a little practical problem. I know, I certainly do. Yeah, and my day job is taking me out of town this week.
My day job brought me back to town this week.
So, I can do some work in the evening between presentations that I'm doing.
Tell you what, folks, we will work with what you get us. And the sooner you can get us something, the better. And this is, we'll work with what we have. Just do the best you can.
That's what you get for working with volunteers, I guess.
I have a practical problem on my part on the CBA, which is we haven't finished the CBA. And
That's true.
so,
But I think we were planning to try to complete it on Monday.
as you know, I've done
Yeah,
lead
right.
up to it, but
Right. Understood.
Do you want any particular guidelines on, we're doing this all in Word presumably, and you're gonna
Yes,
rush them together?
please.
Yeah.
So you can certainly embed charts and things like that.
Right, or if there's a chart or graphic that you want to use that's come out of one of the PowerPoint presentations, you presumably can extract them. Okay, all right, fine. We should definitely get the PowerPoint version of tonight. Yeah.
There's that, and I also want
Jennifer's memo
this
on bench,
spreadsheet that,
Right.
Word format, or I can just
And that's easy too. Yeah.
send it to me, so I'll paraphrase parts of it, with the obstacles.
Sure. Do you have the report on the Lynch Center that Jennifer deposited on, I have it in paper, on electronic, I have it in paper too. I don't think we got it.
Actually, that's okay, because I'll just paraphrase. I'll pull out the points.
Okay.
Now, the high school options and considerations, that's the presentation HMFH did.
A while back.
Yes.
right.
I've got a reasonable handle.
Okay, so why don't you take on that? I'll take on the other existing facilities, and then we should split up the K-8 schools.
Which is tonight's.
You know what? Okay, so,
But Old Lincoln School is option selected for full assessment.
yeah,
So why should,
right, no, that's,
it doesn't make sense
Yeah.
to,
6 and 7 need some work.
Yes. I think we recognized that we were going to have to revisit the list.
Right,
Yeah, no.
but we do
this-
have some
right,
work
there's
done,
There's
so.
some redundancy here, and let me get you something tomorrow.
okay,
that-
so get it to Phil
Yeah,
and I.
yeah.
So, Phil, you'll do the high school piece, which will be plagiarizing. Plagiarizing is good.
Plagiarizing school? Tom Lehrer said it
We
best.
paid for it, so we can use it.
Like no one else's work of age around.
Speaking of the high school, when it comes to there, I don't think we need to do anything more definitive than this, but we do need to make the point in the report that if there's a second high school, there's a districting question about the second high school. We don't want that to just slip away.
Right. I guess my assumption had been that, that the recommendations would fully explain all of those, that
Yep.
anything we're recommending has got to be
So if we recommend a second high school, here are some of the
Here's
consequences.
some, right,
that- yeah.
here's what you have to deal with,
Yeah.
because the stuff that the school committee is gonna have to wrestle with
Yeah.
in considering the recommendations is what needs to be with the
Okay.
recommendation.
Fair enough.
So that's why I think some of this is just, is essentially background.
Yep.
Because the recommendations are where we end up, and that's where we put some of that explanation.
Does that mean some of that's not in this? In the part, for example, the part I'm writing, we're not talking about a second high school and the issues that would come up, that would only be if we recommended them?
No. I mean,
Okay.
you can certainly, you just don't have to go into.
Detail.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think the more we can use bullet points and lists rather than long prose, the better it will be.
Short is better.
Yeah, short is better
That would be a
and
challenge, but,
easily digestible and just
Faster.
lay things out for
Faster,
people.
right.
It is faster, right.
Yep, okay.
There's a lot to get through and.
And we have another meeting on next Monday.
Yeah.
In which we want to go over this.
Yeah, it's not you guys that had this before then? Is that correct?
Yes, I guess that's what I'm saying.
Let's see. Let's see where we are. Okay, thank you all, that's great, and I'll try to put some of that stuff in and get a redraft of this out to everybody tomorrow that takes all this into account.
Next Monday at
5:30.
Are we adjourning?
I think we're at the end of our agenda.
You have more
Would you
assignments?
be willing to take on a sort of MSBA overview, just to give a context for?
About what was funded for, sort of
Yeah.
in the past and what the rules are.
Right.
You could do that.
Just
A one-pager.
stats, because, yeah, I think that would be fine. But because
It's good for people to know.
we strongly believe MSBA support is critical to being able to get
No, I
through all of
agree.
this.
I agree.
I think you're the person who has the knowledge to
The one thing,
give us
a briefing that I just would ask consideration of, and I don't know who the appropriate entity is to do this, but if it's the committee, I
There's so
think we
many
have
we would have to do.
enough knowledge. We're not doing anything here. Even query the MSBA about the things that we have questions about. Because then it's gonna set up the school committee's decision. Because that's what I got to Jack about. I said, wouldn't it be better for us to get these options out on the table in September rather than dancing around what we think they want us to do?
No, I think we would agree with you about that, because we really do need to have
I
some.
can get you, I can get a one-page.
I see.
We need to have some more
Like the
filter.
pre-K and K1, keep rearing its head.
Community perspective.
Sure, why not? Because then it doesn't go all the time. But I was at a meeting with my his devotion from and I said, this is
Can we either make the conversation public or adjourn?
We're just asking her to talk to us about MSBA.
I'm sorry, we should adjourn, okay?
Thank you.
So we are adjourned.
Great.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Bye now.
At 8 minutes past 9.